We're going to lean back and we're going to have a chill time together because there's a new recap that came out almost 2 weeks ago. It's honestly criminal how long we waited. But the 2017 Yu-Gi-Oh! Recap is here. Get your blankets, everybody. Hold up. Let me get the thingy set up. We're gonna drop the link to the video in chat. There it is. We're gonna pin it so that people can go subscribe. Gonna do this. All right. Close that. 2017 Yu-Gi-Oh! Recap. All right. Now, let me think before we hop in where we even left off. End of 2016. End of 2016. Where are we? We are in... So 2015 Necros. Then we have Pendulum. Good amount of Pendulum, probably. Right? Paleo. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Paleo, Metal Foes, ABC, YCS Bochum. Okay, now I'm back. Okay, now I got it. All right. That's where we are. We are ABC, Paleo, Metal Foes. All right. Okay. I got it.
When we last left off, the Arc 5 era was nearing its climax. Over the course of 2016, we had seen the rapid rise and fall of a Tier 0 mega threat in Pepe, a surprisingly diverse and interesting metagame through the World Championship qualifier season, and a recent shakeup into more options with the advent of Metal Foes, ABC, and Paleozoic. As we enter 2017, Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole was on the move in a couple of other ways outside of the standard TCG output. Starting the year off on January 11th, Konami would hold the worldwide release for their new mobile game adaptation of the TCG, Duel Links, which brought with it...
Duel Links came out in 2017? That's almost 8 years ago. Yo, okay.
The advent of the speed duel format, using 3 zones each for monsters and spell traps, as well as a 20
Maybe I should not be watching these. They make me feel old every time.
The game is actually extremely intriguing, and if you want to learn more about it, I'll direct you to the first video I ever uploaded here covering the first year of the game's metagame development. But as for the impact on the TCG, the wider appeal of Yu-Gi-Oh!
Early Duel Links meta wasn't early Duel Links meta just summoning dinosaur vanillas with 1600 attack and getting the field spell that made them 1900? That's how I remember it.
On mobile actually would do a decent amount for bringing in older fans to the game once again, coupled with the English release of the Dark Side of Dimensions movie.
Bro, anyone remember? I'm gonna drop a card name right now, and you will all become aware if you've ever played Duel Links during that time. But who remembers Wall of Disruption, dude? That card gives me nightmares sometimes.
Which was coupled with a re-release of the movie pack from last year, now in gold rarity. YCS Sydney would be held the same weekend as the DSOD release on January 14th, and from it, we'd see that in-off format was still in full swing, with Metal Foes taking up the top spot in representation as well as first place piloted by Michael Duke, but there were many other decks filling the format besides Metal Foe. ABC was continuing to be a fan favorite, taking 7 of the top 32 here, still promoting its rank 4 into Dragon Buster game plan, and it still remained an effective strategy. There were also a couple more odd inclusions, such as Abyss Actor lines and Metal Foes, using Wild Hope as a pop target to search Sassy Rookie, Blue Eyes, now using Fabled Catsith as a search target for Sage to pull more value out of Twin Twister and Melody, and Fire King Cosmo popping back up here with the inclusion of Fire King Yaksha for the ship pops. Following this would be the release of the new Shonen Jump promo, being Odd Eyes Persona Dragon, being another decent Odd Eyes low scale to use with Sky Iris. With all of the preamble out of the way, all eyes turned to the first structure deck release of the year, and given how it had been delayed time and time again, finally seeing it come out would be a boon to a strategy that's been in the fringes for some time now.
Wait, what is this? I don't even recognize this card. Oh, DDD.
Pendulum Domination. Release date, January 20th, 2017. Set type, structure deck. Major strategies,
Lamia.
DDD. Impact.
Oh, I remember this. I remember even the postponing that he was talking about, right? Because I remember Lamia being such an important card in the OCG for such a long time, and we would always look at it and we were like, when are we getting this card? And it took like so long until we actually got it. And then once we got it, no one actually played it. like the DDD deck back then. Like it wasn't really a thing.
Tuner to save the strategy. The Pendulum Domination structure deck is a weird one to start with, because in the OCG, it actually caused a tier 1 takeover for the strategy of DDD, and it was set to be released in the TCG back in July of 2016. However, to help the TCG schedule coincide better with the release of the Blue Eye support, this was actually the listed response.
Yeah, guys, we need to postpone Lamia for like half a year because we need Blue Eyes to win Worlds. You don't understand.
The Rise of the True Dragon structure deck was moved up the schedule and Pendulum Domination was bumped back. So with that said, what support did Domination bring to the so far floundering DDD strategy? Dragonbane King Beowulf was a fusion of a DDD and a DD that gives all DDs piercing and can heavy storm the board into
a DDD and a DD.
First King Siegfried.
Okay, now okay, I know there's a lot of Ds already, but why doesn't why if I combine a DDD and a DD, why does it not make a DDD? I'm just asking questions, all right? Because I feel like that should have been. Anyways.
The level 8 DD lock synchro that can negate a face-up spell trap until your next standby phase and regains life points for each dark contract you control when destroyed. Savant Copernicus is an Armageddon Knight for DDs and dark contracts and can pop itself in scale to prevent burn from a spell card. Orthros can special summon itself from hand when you take burn damage, locking you to fiends for the turn.
There are DD monsters now. Is that the most? Is 4 the most that we have? That's weak shit. They could easily be putting 20 on them. Like, embrace it at this point. Just make like a Caesar King Wave Ragnarok Oblivion Caesar King.
And can in scale pop a spell trap and a DD or dark contract you control. Night Howl is a level 3 tuner that on normal can revive a DD, locking you to fiends for the turn, setting its attack and defense to 0. Lastly, and most importantly, Lamia is a level 1 tuner that can send a dark contract or DD from hand or field to grave to summon herself. Many of these pieces were absolutely critical parts of the DDD line, and with them now available, DDD was one of the most powerful and complicated decks in the metagame. The lines for each possible opening had so many different variations and paths it could go through that the community ended up developing a spreadsheet for every single possible.
Is this the first spreadsheet kind of moment in the Yu-Gi-Oh community?
Opening, which in turn spurred the meme of the deck's complicated nature further. Many honestly expected that with these cards, DD would rapidly rise.
Because I'm trying to think, and I don't really remember any deck before that you would really like approach like this, right? Like I haven't really thought of it like that, but I think DDD might be the first one that you actually just had to spreadsheet out. Like that was how they did it, right? I remember seeing those graphics where it was like, if you start with that card, arrow, do this, then that, like, you know, that's what you end on. And like, that's not something that a lot of other decks had done before that.
The status of best deck in format, but there was a very major complication with that. Because it had been delayed for so long, 3 weeks later, with no major events in between, we'd received the first core set of the year, and with it would come the identity
is that
of
Raging
Yugioh
Tempest?
For almost the entirety of the next year.
Is it Raging Tempest time? It's Raging Tempest time, let's go.
Raging Tempest. Release date, February 10th, 2017. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Zodiac. Impact, Zodiac. Raging Tempest, or Rate for short, is probably one of the most infamous sets in the game's history, and it all has to do with its headlining archetype, but for the sake of everything else, we are going to save it for last on the archetype coverage. The Wind Witches were a series of wind spellcasters designed to synergize with each other to synchro climb entire—
But the first time I remember anyone playing Wind Witches is like 2018 with Invoked or something, or maybe at the end of 2017. Did anyone play these during Zodiac format? Maybe. I don't remember.
By themselves into a level 7 synchro and then into an 8 with that 7. Icebell could special summon herself if you controlled no monsters, then summon a Wind Witch from your deck, burning the opponent for 500 and locking you to level 5 and up wins from the extra that turn.
I mean, Icebell was genuinely a good card, right? But it was the problem. The problem with these was that you had to open Icebell. If you didn't open Icebell, the others, they did kind of suck. Like, I mean, the level 1 is terrible. The level 4 was also still slow.
Glassbell, on summon, searches a Wind Witch, locking you to winds when you do. Snowbell can summon herself from hand if you control 2 or more winds, and only winds, and makes a synchro made with it unable to be destroyed by card effects. Winterbell is a level 7 synchro that burns the opponent for the level of a Wind Witch engraved times 200, and can summon a monster from hand with a lower level than a Wind Witch you control in the battle phase. These cards formed a self-contained line thanks to Icebell, who could summon herself, summon Glassbell out of deck and burn the opponent for 500, then have Glassbell search for Snow, who could then summon herself. From there, Ice and Glass make Winter, who burns the opponent for another 800 thanks to Glass Engrave, and they can be synchroed with Snow into Crystal Wing, who now also can't be destroyed by card effects. The primary downside to this line was that it wind locked you, but given time, this wouldn't be an issue in the slightest.
This was technically not bad against Zodiac, right? Because the Crystal Wing couldn't be popped by Trident, but I still think like the fact that if you didn't open specifically the level 3, it wasn't very good.
Ancient Gear would get a new
Overall
wave of support, but in a completely new direction for the archetype based on their usage in the Arc 5 anime as the default
Mega
villain
lol.
deck. Hunting Hound, burned for 600 on normal, has the Ancient Gear spell Trap Stun, and can fusion summon an Ancient Gear once per turn. Howitzer is a fusion of any 2 Ancient Gears,
I've seen that
is
one.
unaffected by card effects, can burn the opponent for 1000 on a hard once per turn, and if destroyed floats into any Ancient Gear in deck ignoring summoning conditions. Chaos Ancient Gear Giant is a fusion of any 4 Ancient Gears.
Oh, they still play this guy to this day, I think.
Locks the opponent from using monster effects in the battle phase, can attack all monsters once, and deals piercing. The idea of unrelenting damage from the anime was adapted quite well here, being fair, but it's a far cry from a good strategy when the starting life points are at 8,000 and not 4,000. Still, it did bring some attention towards Ancient Gears as a rogue strategy alongside a structure deck release later this year. Spiral would receive another wave of support in
I love Spiral
Tough.
Tough.
Super Agent on field and engrave, and can attempt to pop a card by calling
Spiral
the super
Tough
type
is by far the coolest Spiral card. You cannot change my mind, and I don't think anyone wants to change my mind because that is objectively true.
the opponent's top deck right, Utility Wire, which spins a card to top of deck if you control a Super Agent, and Recapture, which steals an opponent's monster the first time you summon a Spiral each turn and can banish itself from grave to prevent a Spiral's destruction. While a solid wave, Spiral would continue to see no play as its own standalone deck, though many were picking up on the idea that Spiral as an engine for another deck could be useful thanks to the vast amounts of advantage the deck can generate off of its smaller pieces. Okay, fine, let's talk about Zoo. Zodiac was a new series of Beast Warriors aimed at cheating the Exceeds mechanic by allowing the user to overlay any Zodiac Exceed onto a single Zodiac monster, with each Exceed able to do that once per turn. The trade-off here was that the Exceeds had no attack and defense on their own, inheriting the stats from all of their Zodiac materials, with each main deck monster also giving an effect to a Beast Warrior Exceed their material under. Rapier, Fool...
I will say, we will talk about Zoo more today, of course. But I think the concept's kind of cool. I think the concept is kind of cool. There are individual cards within the concept that are misdesigned, and we will get to those. But the Zodiac concept is it's a pretty cool deck. I actually liked Zodiac in 2017. The certain combos were way too powerful because of certain cards being a little too generic. I'm looking at specifically Broad Bull, and I'm also looking at Ratpier summoning out 2 level 4 bodies for no reason. Like, that was a little much, but the Zodiac concept in itself, I think is pretty cool.
Foolish Burial's a Zodiac on normal and gives its Exceed the ability to detach to summon another rat from deck.
You liked Zodiac so much that you played Paleo? Look, only because I think the concept is cool and I like it doesn't mean I have to play it. I can also like Zodiac for being able to beat the shit out of it with Paleozoics, all right? Calm down.
Bunny Blast recurs a Zodiac when destroyed and lets its Exceed detach to negate a spell that targets it. Whiptail can attach itself to a Beast Warrior Exceed from hand or field and banishes any monster that battles its Exceed. Thoroughblade can discard a Zodiac to draw 1 and gives its Exceed.
Thoroughblade, coolest main deck Zodiac, no competition. No competition. No different takes allowed.
Piercing, and Ram summons a Zodiac from grave when destroyed and lets its Exceed detach.
Actually, Ram's pretty good too. Good too. I think Thoroughblade's cooler, but Ram's pretty cool.
to negate a trap that targets it. As for the Exceeds, each gains the stats of its Zodiac materials, can overlay onto a single Zodiac monster once per turn, and have their own unique effects beyond that. Borbo can attack directly, and if it has 12 material when you do, nukes the opponent's hand and field and swaps to defense mode. Tiger Mortar can detach to attach a Zodiac from grave to any Exceed you control. Broad Bull can detach to search a Beast Warrior monster that can be normal summoned or set, and
yeah, all my homies hate Broad Bull.
Can detach on quick effect to pop a card on field.
Dryden's cool.
Lastly, while most of their spell traps were completely irrelevant, Barrage was the exception, being a continuous spell that can pop a card to summon a Zodiac from deck and can attach itself from grave to a Zodiac Exceed if destroyed by a card effect. So where do we begin with Zodiac? I guess we'll start with the Rat. Rapier on its own
That's what I was about to say. Probably start by normal summoning Rat.
Of degenerative lines, namely stemming from the basic premise of cycling its effect multiple times to end on at least Trident and a rank 4. Basics there was overlay a Rat into Borbo, into Tiger Mortar.
It is very funny to me how this is considered broken, that one card gives you a Trident and a rank 4. Because if you say that in 2024, people will literally make fun of you, right? If you're building a deck around, hey, my normal summon is supposed to be Trident and a Daigusto Emerald turn 1, you're like, all right, well, but you're gonna die every time.
Detach the board to summon Rat, overlay into Broad Bull, detach to summon Rat, detach to search, overlay the 2 Rats into Emerald to draw 1, and finally overlay the Broad Bull into Trident, but that was the very basic level of it all. Through all sorts of recursion and kooky lines, a single Rat could cascade into 5+ draw.
Or rather, if that was meta today, it would be considered healthy, I think. Right? If that sort of concept would be the go-to at top level competitive play, I'm pretty sure people would be like, yeah, that's perfect, right? That's exactly right. That's how it should be.
And all sorts of advantage on top of that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Trident being able to pop anything on a quick effect was an insanely good effect for what was effectively a generic rank 4 at the time, which put the previous option of Rafflesia in a worse position as you no longer needed a brick to get a quick effect pop off of her. On top of the fact that Trident was usually just the cherry on top. Broad Bull was, in hindsight, the far more problematic of the Exceed pool because its search effect had such a wide range of targets, in addition to being a...
This thing had no business searching any Beast Warrior. It should have just been a Zodiac monster. As simple as that. And then it would have been fine. That's what people did with it like 90% of the time anyways. People searched like Whiptail with it, but then they ended up making, like, at some point they discovered other things you could do with it, like Lunalight combos into multiple fusion substitute like draws or whatever it was. Like, it's just, yeah. Also the fact that this should have not been the one that needs 2 level 4s, right? Because that's the thing. You can only summon them with the alternative summoning condition once per turn, but you can hard make them as often as you like. And that's why Broad Bull was the biggest problem, because it just required 2 level 4s. No one would have cared if, like, this one needed 3 level 4s. Almost none of the degenerate stuff would have been possible.
Soft once per turn, meaning if you could get out 2 or more, it was repeatable, made better by it being the only 2 material Zodiac Exceed in the first place, meaning that it was actually likely that you could summon them out multiple times. Whiptail was probably one of the more fair options, but only by comparison, as it gave Trident more fuel for popping cards in addition to an extra layer of protection by disincentivizing monsters attacking into her by threatening a banish after the fact. Barrage posed a very serious issue though, as through its effect popping itself, you could perform the entire Zodiac line without the use of your normal summon, and with its inclusion, you were technically playing 9 copies of Rat to start lines between 3 Rat, 3 Tenki, and 3 Barrage. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say 9? I meant at least 12. MX Saber Invoker, being one of the earliest Exceeds printed to the TCG, can summon any level 4 Earth Warrior or Beast Warriors from the deck with any 2 level 3 materials. You get where this is going, right? Speedroid Terror Top now represents full zoo combo without the normal.
All my homies hate Speedroid Terror Top too.
too, being able to access Invoker, who accesses Rat, who combos through that way. Zodiac would descend upon the meta and insert themselves into literally every deck in the format to some extent, which we will talk about more in depth with the next YCS. Alright, time to rapid fire the one-offs. True King Lithosagem was by far the best option of the True Kings, popping Earths for its summon and being able to rip 3 cards from the opponent's extra deck if both pops were Earth, floating into a non-Earth Worm in Grave on destruction. While not super...
This card is unironically still scary today. Like, if that card was ever going to see play again, it is so nuts to banish 3 monsters with different names.
Relevant right now outside of a tech play in Zodiac, Lithosagem would find itself in a very comfortable home soon. Spiritual Beast Tamer Winda is both sides of the Ritual Beast sub-archetypes and floats into any Ritual Beast in deck or extra on destruction, being a massive boost for the archetype, but unfortunately coming out at just the worst possible time for playability. Miscellaneousaurus can be discarded on a quick effect to make your dinosaurs unaffected by opponent's activated effects for that main phase, and can banish itself in any number of dinosaurs from grave to summon a dinosaur of that level from deck. While an incredible boon for dinosaur decks, the strategy was nowhere near playable at the time, though this would find a home within a couple months. Foolish Burial Goods was a foolish burial for spell traps. While that sounds mediocre, this actually...
It's an incredibly good set, right? Like, you look at those cards and it's like some of those or a lot of those are still so relevant years later. Like Foolish Burial Goods, Misk. I mean, there's more.
Much needed space in the game as a whole, as players
the best
were
one's still
resorting
to
to cards
come.
like magical hats to put spell traps in grave up until this point. So the card was a welcome addition to the pool. Sea Monster of Theseus is a tuner fusion of any two.
The best card of 2017.
Two tuners with no other effects. Most of you watching are probably confused why I bring this one up, and it's because of the fact that Konami was proudly bragging on their blog that they were going to be releasing the best card of the year in the TCG exclusive slot for this set, referencing this card.
There's 2 very funny stories about this card. The first one is that one. Which is like insane behavior. I don't understand how like anyone in their right mind could think that this was going to be the best card of 2017. And then the second funny story is that they even messed it up. They released it and they forgot to print tuner on it because it's supposed to be a tuner. And then they had to do this whole thing where you could... I don't actually know. There's like one version of this card that's actually quite hard to get because you could... which one is the rarer one? The one that says tuner or the one that doesn't say tuner? Actually, let me check. Maybe we can check on Card Market which one's more popular or which one more people have. Because what you could do is you could send in, I think, I didn't do it back then, but you could send in your your wrong version and they would return the correct one or something. So like what do you think is more common? Like the one that says tuner or the one that doesn't say tuner? I'm checking on Card Market, but I can't really tell. The tuner is rarer because nobody wants to give away their misprint. Is there like an expensive version of it? The corrected version. Okay. Okay, it looks like the corrected version is expensive. I don't know. Because not many people did it. Anyways.
Yeah, so Theseus was always considered niche. It did have uses, specifically for those involving instant fusion where you needed a tuner, or in Zolkin's case, a level 5 tuner, but calling this the best card of 2017 was laughable even then, as the Zodiacs were in the same set and we have a whole lot more to cover from the year. Lost Wind negates the effects and has the attack of a special summoned monster on the field. It can set itself from grave if the opponent specials a monster from the extra deck. This sounds niche in a lot of respects, but in actuality would be an insanely powerful card for specifically Paleozoic, as a trap that was a repeatable trigger for your Paleo summon effects is always appreciated, and the attack having a negation is actually permanent, so it covers a lot more situations than one expects at first. And it got even better with the last card we're going to talk about, about,
Let's
that grass
go!
looks greener. When you activate this, if you have more cards in your deck than your opponent, you mill cards from the top of your deck until your deck count is the same as your opponent. This spell was, theoretically, a 20 card mill, and all it took to play was running a 60 card deck. Grass caused arguably one of the biggest shifts in deck composition in the game's history, as on the surface it changed decks that wanted to mill from being 40 cards to 60 cards, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. If you were a grass deck and you matched up into another grass deck, you'd both be at 60 cards, meaning that grass is now a completely dead card. As such, even decks that weren't grass decks would consider playing higher deck counts specifically to dodge the grass matchup, whether that be a full 60 or even a midpoint like 50 cards. The usual trade-off to playing 60 was a lower consistency, but now with the best engine in the game being a 1-card combo you can see off of a minimum of 12 cards in your deck, the loss in consistency for playing larger than a normal deck was
I do think this was more of a hypothetical thing than something that people actually did in practice. Like, at least the way I remember it, all of the Zodiac decks, they still played 40. Like, in a tournament, you wouldn't really run into many people playing like 50 card decks to counter grass a little bit. Because like statistically speaking, it just wasn't really worth it to make your deck worse in case you play against a grass deck. And then it only even matters if they have the grass access. Like for the most part, all of the decks that didn't have grass were still played rather close to 40 cards, you know, maybe like a 41, 42 here and there, but like it wasn't really a thing in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh to play 50 to counter grass. But obviously the whole discussion of is it worth it to play a 60 card deck with grass over just playing a 40 card Zodiac deck, that was a huge discussion. In my opinion, or like my opinion at the time was the following. I didn't like grass decks, and that might confuse you because of what's about to happen. But I was not a huge fan of the concept of grass decks, especially in the beginning, because I felt like the 60 card, a lot of those 60 card decks that were known in the beginning, like I don't know what kind of decks, people like Infernoids and stuff like that. My opinion on those decks is that they are just worse versions of Zodiac in order to high roll with grass, and I think on average they were worse than 40 card decks. We'll talk about the one exception, which was the deck I ended up using in a moment when we get to it. But I think genuinely in that time, like in terms of like combo decks, it was just best to play Zodiac if you didn't want to play, you know, Paleo.
actually decently offset. Rather than just talking theoretical on all this, let's look at some results. YCS Seattle would be a week after Rate's release on February 18th, and the meta that had come before was completely obliterated in one massive strike with the release of Rate. On the surface, the format does look rather diverse, with 10 different decks making the top 32 cut. But if we look below the surface, we can see that a grand total of 31 of the top 32 decks were actually playing Zoo in some capacity. Zodiac had completely taken over the format. Commonly, any way into Zodiac Rapier meant that you were going to have a Trident and additional draw.
See, and this is even before fusion substitute stuff was discovered.
And then plenty of wiggle room beyond that to set up a board of options to play into the opponent's next turn, which in turn resulted in most decks playing options to get Rat both on the normal summon and without burning the normal, specifically in the case of Barrage and Terror Top. This resulted in a number of different variants of Zoo specifically charting into the top cut here, between the Pure variant, an Artifact variant to capitalize on Moral Talk and Scythe, a Cosmo variant utilizing the power of Barrage to pop your ships for 7.
Perform a pal King Bear as a search target for Broad Bull. What did that do again? I forgot. What was someone explain what the King Bear does when you, I remember people doing this, but I forgot what it did, because you don't play 2 pendulum scales.
Setup, and the most popular variant behind Pure, Kaiju, utilizing Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and the Kaiju names to iron out your going second matchup, as Trident on the normal summon was a pretty standard killer for the mirror match. Alexis Rodriguez would take the event on this variant, capitalizing heavily on the base level understanding of setting up Trident with no protection being the go-to line for most players. Beyond the zoo-focused decks, however, almost every other deck would still be playing rat lines to play with their own strategies, as adding a quick effect pop to any board was still killer. Infernoid would be the most popular strategy outside of stricter zoo variant, and
this is what I mean. This deck was just, in my opinion, and I know a certain Billy Break who would disagree with me, I think this deck sucked ass if you didn't have grass. If you didn't draw grass or resolve grass, I did not think this deck was that great. But that is obviously subjective.
would be the deck to show off the new power of the spell Grass. The ability to mill 20 plus cards is an insane boon for the strategy, and as such could set up any number of waves of Infernoids directly out the gate. As such, a couple of cards that had been—
You're still playing Zoo, so it can't be that bad, but you're playing way less Zoos because you're playing a 60 card deck, and you have a whole bunch of bricks in between, right? Like you have some random like Infernoids here, like Snows, which if you don't have grass is also not that good. You've got like some random like sorts of whatever revealing light trap. Look, this is way less consistent than a 40 card Zodiac deck. So like I'm pretty confident that if you don't draw grass, this deck is just worse than Zodiac. But you do draw grass a decent amount of the time, so that also like overall it makes up for it. But I just didn't prefer it, right? Like you'd have your Maxis less often because you're playing 60 and all that. It just didn't quite like, I tried those decks, but I never liked them.
Present for some time at this point would finally start
on
seeing
the left,
significant
please.
play.
Yep, okay.
Mainly that of Void Imagination, being useful now as a way to get multiple bosses on the board on your first turn now that fuel wasn't a concern, but also Left Arm Offering, as sacrificing your—
Is this before Ash Blossom? Yes, this is before Ash Blossom. There is if you activate those spell cards in this format, they actually just resolve. Can you believe it? Can you imagine you activate Pot of Desires, it will resolve every time? Crazy.
Hand to get a mill 20 actually was a decent trade-off. Even with the deck's primary play being that of grass into Infernoids, Zoo would still be present here thanks to Terratop and Barrage, allowing a Trident to be set up prior to going down your Infernoid lines, playing a fairly minimal line of enablers there. Volcanic would see a top spot here, which makes sense as the Scattershot engine standardly needed a lighter package to latch onto to be effective, which the new Zoo cards would fill out nicely. Metal Foes would see a top here, notably playing a 50 card lineup to sort of shoot the gap between consistency needed to beat Zoo and the deck size needed to shut off a significant grass mill, which in turn helped in allowing them to play all of the options needed for the strategy, including the newly added Zoo engine. The only deck in the entire top 32 to not be playing Zoo cards period would be Burning Abyss, leaning into the 60 card variant as well to primarily cut off access to opposing grass.
Of course it would be a 60 card Burning Abyss deck with one copy of grass. Oh man.
Though was playing a single copy themselves to capitalize off of the grave effects. With the meta substantially shifted at its very core, the next deck building set would arrive just a week later, and while it wouldn't be as fundamentally game warping as Zoo in the short term, it would help to introduce another combatant to play into this new Tier 0 menace.
Credit plants. Oh, right. What was this? Fusion Enforcers?
Yeah. Release date, February 24th, 2017.
Oh, Invoked
set type,
already?
Deck building set. Major strategies, Predaplant, Fluffle, Invoke. Impact, a normal summon engine of epic proportions. Fusion Enforcers, coming just 2 weeks after Raging Tempest, had a massive uphill battle to win, and while it wouldn't dethrone Zoo by any means, it would at the very least introduce a new option into the metagame. Starting with the two that didn't quite land, both Predaplant and Fluffle would get new options for their strategies, with Predaplant getting Chimera.
Okay, then I take back what I said earlier, because I'm pretty sure then people played Wind Witch during Zodiac format. Because I do remember playing against like Wind Witch Invoked right after it came out, at a couple of regionals. So I'm pretty sure maybe Wind Witch didn't see play on release, but they definitely did play it after this came out.
Fleesia as an in-archetype boss monster, and Fluffle getting a couple smaller pieces in Octopus, Penguin, and the new boss Kraken. But neither of these strategies would have staying power in the recently heightened power floor. Invoked would be the last of the three, and be a completely new archetype, centered around the sole main deck monster of Alistair the Invoker, who can be discarded to buff a fusion by 1000 and searches the archetype fusion spell Invocation on normal or flip. Invocation can fuse materials in hand for any fusion monster, or can banish materials from field or either grave for an...
Wasn't it in the finals of German Nationals? It could be. Yeah, it could be.
Invoked fusion monster, and can return a banished Alistair the Invoker to hand to shuffle itself from grave back into deck. Magical Meltdown is the archetypal field spell that searches Alistair the Invoker on activation and prevents the activation of your fusion summon cards and effects from being negated, and blocks responding to the fusion summon of a monster. As for the archetype's fusions, there would be one for each of the 6 primary attributes in the game, taking Alistair and its attribute as material. Kaliga takes a dark and locks both players to only 1 monster effect activation and 1 attack per turn. Raijin takes a wind and can quick effect flip a monster face down once per turn. Kokaitis takes a water, can attack and defense using its attack stat, and can't be destroyed or targeted by card effects.
Duel Links players, look away. Don't look. Dude, this card, by the way, this card was the reason why I played 2 Sky Cavalry Centaurea in my Paleo deck, I'm pretty sure, for the YCS, because I had a testing game where I could out one of it, but then I couldn't out the second.
Purgatrio takes a fire, gains 200 attack for each opponent's controlled card, can attack all monsters once each, and deals piercing. Magellanica takes an earth and is just a large body at 3k, and Mechaba takes a light and can negate and banish any card activated by discarding a card of the corresponding super type. Lastly, Elysium is a fusion of an invoked monster and a monster summoned from extra, is considered all 6 of the primary attributes on field, and can banish an invoked monster from field or grave and all monsters the opponent controls of that attribute. Alistair the Invoker would represent one of the most consistent normal summon engines in the game, in that with access to Invoker, you had access to a fusion summon every turn between your cards and your opponents. But there were clear outliers in which fusions were the best. Mechaba was obviously the best on the surface, being an omni-negate that can be made with one of the most common attributes, but each attribute had their strengths and weaknesses depending on the metagame. As such, Alistair would find itself splashed into decks that didn't require the normal summon, and played...
If you really think about it, like, this engine was so much more clunky. It's actually kind of interesting that it actually ended up being good in the beginning, because, like, you didn't have the simple, like, oh, I'm just gonna link off my Alistair for a light monster, so I can, and then I'm gonna link off that light monster into something else, so it's in the graveyard, so then I can invocation just from the graveyard. Like, people would constantly summon Alistair and then fuse like a hand trap away from their hand. Like, they would play like Valor and Ghost Ogre because those could immediately make Mechaba. So, like, it wasn't even like that good of a combo. You would literally have to, like, get rid of a hand trap in your hand to do that. Unless when you were going second, it was fine, because then you would use Valor or Ogre, and then you could fuse from the graveyard. That was actually fine. But, like, yeah, it's a very funny, like, it's actually very funny to think about how clunky it actually was, and it was still good.
Attributes that meshed well with it, and with that, another deck would rise up into the fringe of the meta thanks to Alistair's interaction with a so far unimpactful engine, which we'll discuss soon. YCS Atlanta would be held 2 weeks after Enforcer's release, and from it we would see just the slightest movement in the outer fringes of the top cut. Invoked had proven to be an interesting slot into the Zodiac core, seeing most of the normal summon reliant options for Zoo here shaved for the Invoke package of Meltdown, Alistair, and...
Was it good, or was everything else just bad? No, it was good. Like, I mean, to 2017 standards, of course, in nowadays standards, it wouldn't be. But, like, it was competing in a format with full power Zodiac, right? So, like, for the time being, it was an impressive showing.
Invocation. The primary benefit to the edition was on top of the usual Trident from the Zoo combo, you could also make a Raijin quite easily between Terratop and Emerald used.
Every time Lullaby's in the meta, you know it was a shit meta. I don't agree with that. I mean, like, I know where you're coming from, because what you're trying to say is tier 0 metas are always bad, which, you know, that's a take I don't agree with. Because Lullaby, all Lullaby means is there's very popular decks that you know what to call against. But for the most part, I don't agree that every tier 0 meta sucks. For example, Zodiac tier 0 wasn't as bad. I think Zodiac format overall, in the way I experienced it, I thought it was fine. There's definitely other tier 0s that were way worse.
For the combo, meaning an added Book of Moon effect to your end board. This would also be one of the primary focuses of the new strategy in the fringes of the meta known as Artifact Wind Witch Invoke, taking the prior released Wind Witch package for accessing Crystal Wing on the first turn, and then pair it with the normal summon of Alistair to access Raijin, as you would still be under the Wind Lock. In addition to this, the artifact package proved to be a solid inclusion with Invoked thanks to providing game-winningly strong effects when summoned with Sanctum, or to be used with Alistair to make Mechaba, providing an Omni-Negate to the end board. Beyond that, what we've come to expect from the new Zoo dominance once again came to pass, seeing 29 of the top 32 running the engine in some regard, though shockingly would not take the event overall. Corey Roca would take that honor on Paleozoic frogs, proving that the correct combination of traps and frogs could actually be a sufficient answer to the newly dominant threat. Lost Wind in particular would be a standout, as the trap was both repeatable for your paleo effects and its debuffs were permanent, meaning that if you could land it onto a Trident, that effect was off for as long as she remained on the board. Directly following YCS Atlanta would be a couple of minor set releases. The first of these was the Star Pack Battle Royale, which was mostly unimpactful outside of a reprint for Speedroid Terror Top, which had become a lot more valuable as of late. The other would be Raging Tempest Special Edition, which would continue the tradition of these sets printing a couple of cards from the next core set early, but this time would actually make a difference. Bow Baboon, if normal or special, draws a card and stacks a card from hand on top or bottom of deck, and if destroyed summons any number of Bow Baboon from deck. This would actually make a very specific version of Zoo from the previous YCS a lot more powerful, being that of Metal Foe Zoo, as now by popping a Bow Baboon for a Metal Foe search, you could summon 2 additional from deck, stack your hand with 2 more draws, and overlay them for MX Saber Invoker for a full Zoo line access. Guatemala City would be the first testing grounds for this new tech, and without skipping a beat, Metal Foe Zoo would adapt, slotting the new option in to further promote the synergy between Zoo and Metal Foe.
See, 58 cards to counter grass decks, let's go.
Also notably playing 60 cards to not only fit in all the new options, but also to counteract the rising population.
Okay, I need to know what Performapal King Bear does, because I remember people playing it, but I don't remember what it does. I need to understand. Hold up. Performapal King Bear. Once per turn during the end phase, if this card was activated this turn, you can destroy this card. If you do, add a level 7 or higher monster that's higher than your grave for the extra deck. Okay, it just gives you follow-up. You just activate it, it pops itself in the end phase, and then you get some follow-up. All right, cool.
Of grass variants like Infernoid Zoo. Gerald South Chavez would take the event on just that, not only seeing the Zoo package and varied Infernoid names, but also 3 copies of Lullaby of Obedience. The power spell had found a format where it could dominate, as with over—
Wait, where is that? Not in his deck, is it?
80% of the top cut on the Zoo package, calling Rapier with it could prove insanely valuable, especially as that would then provide a total of 3 activations for the effect since you didn't need to use your own rat for the startup. YCS Prague would be the same weekend, and though we've unfortunately lost a major portion of the coverage for this event, one thing that was apparent is that Paleo was not about to be left behind by the new Tier 0 menace. Joshua Schmidt would take the event on Paleo Frog, bringing the first successful variant of Grass Paleo to the masses. While the concept of using
anti-spell inside deck? Kind of cringe. Floodgate Andy? Holy.
Grass with Paleo had been kicked around since the card's reveal, its impact was more often than not subpar, as you could easily load tons of Paleos into the grave, but not really trigger them all that successfully since—
I love this deck to death, dude. This is so cool.
You only had a limited number of traps to be used after the fact. There were a couple of cards here that helped counteract that problem.
5 Mirror Forces, by the way. 5 Mirror Forces in 2017. Imagine that. 5 of them things. Bro, Quaking Mirror Force? Peak.
The first was a long-known card that would be reintroduced here in Card of Demise. One of the hardest parts for Paleo with Demise is the lock on special summoning, meaning that you can't set up a totally after using it. But with more focus being placed on loading up the grave with traps, that fear goes away a bit as it's clear we're setting up for a longer game with it. The other, and far more apparent departure, was Backjack. Backjack had already been experimented with for Burning Abyss strategies thanks to its ability to set up Fire Lake bushes, but here when dumped off—
What's that book card? Forbidden Apocrypha. Forbidden Apocrypha you can activate when there's, I think, 2 cards of the same extra deck type, like Exceeds, and then you send all of them to the graveyard. Hold up. I think it was if there's 2 more. Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that you need to be careful with Forbidden Apocrypha is that your opponent can dodge it with the Trident, because if there's exactly 2 Exceeds, like the way Apocrypha works, if you activate it, and then you declare the extra deck type. Like you declare exceed. And then on resolution, it checks if there's 2 or more. And if there's not 2 or more, it doesn't actually send everything. So like, let's say your opponent goes first and does the standard Trident plus Emerald, and then you activate Apocrypha, they can go Trident, destroy their own Trident, or destroy their own Emerald. And then you wouldn't actually send everything. But it's still, that was like the worst case scenario. It was still a 1-for-1 trade with one of their cards. So it's like, it wasn't that bad.
Brass can set up your top deck and gives you effectively an additional trap to your back row line, as its
What's the side deck card next to Solemn Warning? Wiretap.
Excavate ability made the trap live from then on. Because of this, you can now also play cards like Fiend Griefing for Disruption, which also in turn is a trigger for your Paleos and now is a setup for more triggers. With innovation still present in the metagame, a shift was in the air. The spring import set was right around the corner, and it wouldn't just bring imports this time around, it was about to bring a shift that is still hotly debated to this day.
Ooh, Bion?
Duelist Saga. Release date, March 31st, 2017. Set type, import set. Major strategies, Shark, GX manga cards.
Okay, guys, I need your opinion right now on the ultra rare style in these kind of sets. Oh. I need your opinion on how these ultra rares look in these kind of sets, because I've heard very different things about the thing. Don't know them. I let me see. Hold up. Vision Hero Vion. Let me see if I can get a good picture of it. From Duza. No, this is not the one. You can kind of tell here. Hold up. I'm looking for a good picture of it, because they have a different style of ultra. I don't really know how to explain it or how to describe it. I'm looking for a good picture of it. Oh, I think this one. Yeah, this one kind of. Well, the card is curved as hell, but like you can kind of tell what I mean. They have like a much more. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, how do I describe this, chat? Can someone help me describe this? I don't know how to describe it. They look different. The ultra rare foiling in the picture looks different. They have like a more flat kind of look to it, but I don't know. I personally don't like it as much. I personally don't like it that much than other ultra rares, but even sometimes I think it's kind of cool on some card. I don't know. Anyways, sorry.
Erratas. Impact, rewriting the game's history. Duelist Saga.
Metallic is a good description. Yeah. A more metallic look. It looks like a metallic effect on the background. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. It's not just hollow, it's more like a metallic foiling behind it. Yeah.
Would be a replacement of sorts for the annual Gold Series release, with this being the first year that Gold Series would not be printed since its debut back in 2008. With it, we'd receive a bunch of anime-centric cards, including a set of OCG imports for various anime and manga characters, such as Ryo Sharks with Silent Angler, Manga Kyoji's Numbers with Number 70 Malevolent Sin, Manga Aster's Vision Heroes with Vision Hero Vion, a tribute to Jaden's Heroes with Honest Neos, Manga Bastion's Zombies with Gozuki, Manga Hibiki's Dark Lords with Ukobak, and a new version of Yusei's Boss and Cosmic Blazer Dragon. However, most of these would have no impact in the short term. The far more talked about portion of the set would be a series of erratas made to famously powerful cards from the
Man, don't remind me of the brain controlled text change, dude. That makes me mad. It makes me so mad.
Game's history, some of which have been banned for quite some time at this stage. These erratas were intended to bring the power level of these cards more in line with what is considered acceptable for the game's current context, and as such, the following cards were permanently errata to have the following updates. Brain Control could now only affect normal summonable and settable monsters. Imperial Order no longer had the option to refuse.
So basically, just for context, the reason why I hate this so much is because Brain Control is literally now completely unusable, even though in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It could actually be at 3 with no problems, even in its original form. Like, the original Brain Control is literally just a worse version of Change of Heart, and Change of Heart is legal and not even played that much. So, like, an unerrata Brain Control could have just been legal, and we could have played, like, maybe we could have played with OG Brain Control, and it would have been no problem. Instead, they changed its text and made it unplayable, which is even, like, it's just bad. Because now if you go back to, like, play the Edison event in Master Duel, you have to deal with the fact that you have, like, new effect Brain Control that just is kind of bad. It sucks. And then do Imperial Order on the other side then? Like, nah, man, I don't want to even think about it.
If you had the life points, you have to pay it. Necro Valley now also negated type and attribute changes.
Necro Valley text change. Tell me something new every other week.
The grave, and now also negated the effects of cards that move themselves out of grave. Future Fusion now delays its deck dump by 1 turn to allow the opponent a chance to counter it. Rescue Cat now negates the effects of the monster it summons, and now
look, there are certain cards where I personally feel like, or I don't understand what the point of the errata is, because I feel like there is this, I feel like they're afraid, or there's this policy about, like, we won't reprint banned cards because we don't think they will sell very well. But then again, these errata version of these cards are also still, like, unplayable, right? Like, so, like, if you want to print Future Fusion again because you think it's an iconic card, bro, just leave it banned and reprint it in a cool rarity. Like, people will still like it because it's Future Fusion for retro formats and for whatever, right? Like, people will still be interested in it. But, like, now you've ruined the card, so you can unban it, cool, but, like, no one is gonna care about it. I don't know. It's a weird concept. The only form of errata that I find somewhat acceptable is when the card remains playable, like what they did with Summon Sorceress. But then again, at the same time, I think you could just be making a new card. You could just make a new card that works like that, and I think that'd be better. I like leaving cards in their original state for, like, Time Wizard purposes and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It just gives me a weird vibe.
Also a hard once per turn. Bryonic is now a hard once per turn. And lastly, Yugioh Guardian now requires an Earth Tuner to summon. Many of these erratas...
What they did to my boy Yugioh is also a crime. It's a crime. In 2017, we're watching the 2017 recap. Yugioh Guardian would have not seen play whatsoever if they just brought it back with its original form. It's a crime.
Are understandable for the power level the cards provided, but some were also extremely contentious, specifically in that of Yugioh Guardian. Yugioh had already been legal in the TCG again for some time before this errata, and had done absolutely nothing in note, so errataing it here seemed pointless for many. To help drive these erratas in, a new ban list would take effect the same day as Saga's release on March 31st, 2017. And on top of all the errata releases, a couple of extremely interesting hits would take place for the fully taken over Tier 0 metagame. Newly banned were Magispector Kirin, the primary power play of most Pendulum strategies, Vanity's Emptiness, the staple floodgate that's been around for far too long at this point.
Bro, Vanity's Emptiness started seeing play at this point like 5 years ago. It's crazy how long it takes sometimes.
Tyrant Neptune's a very odd hit, but it will make a lot more sense with an upcoming set, as the hit now is to prevent a very degenerate interaction with it that would have become available with the next core set, which we'll discuss with that release. Newly limited were Maxi, down from 2, and Bryonic, Rescue Cat, Brain Control, Future Fusion, and Imperial Order, all with their new erratas in tow. Newly semi-limited were Wisdom Eye Magician, up from 1, Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, a hit to the Rising Staple Board Breaker, and Zodiac Rat Pier, the combo enabler for so many decks in the Tier 0 format. Lastly, unlimited would be Sangan, who had also received an errata back in 2016 but was still banned until now. Easily the most talked about change here was Rapier, as bringing the copies in deck down from 3 to 2 would seemingly solve the issue of it being used as a generic combo enabler for any strategy, right?
Right.
YCS Denver would be held just over a week later and oops! So as it turns out, while hitting Ratza 2 did absolutely curb its use as it was used initially, it was by no means knocked out of the meta, as crafty players quickly adapted Zoo lines to do far more interesting things. For example, with a little bit of labbing, players realized that with a way into Rat and Instant Fusion, the Zoo
take
combo
those
could be
Denko
extended
Sekkas out
far
of there real
beyond
quick.
what was done before, ending with 5 draws, Trident, and Emerald. This was primarily thanks in part to Lunalight Black Sheep, a beast warrior searchable with Broad Bull, being able to search for polymerization, which could actually be fusion substitute thanks to the fact that it was always considered poly. With this, you could actually fuse 2 of your used Exceeds into Norden. That's right, we're fusing Norden correctly, the way it is written on the card. Then once Norden was used up, you could put it back with Fusion Sub's Grave Effect to draw and get another Norden proc later. This in addition to other advancements, such as the reintroduction of Brilliant Fusion into the metagame as a rank 4 and normal enabler with Trick Clown and Seraphonite respectively, Retaliating Seed both as a way to counter Zoo and Barrage.
I feel like you can tell how we've gotten to this modern Yu-Gi-Oh mentality with these sort of decks. I think you can kind of get the idea of when Yu-Gi-Oh has like started becoming modern Yu-Gi-Oh around this time period, I think, where like people are like, you know what? I'm gonna play this Black Sheep in my deck that can search Fusion Substitute, that can Fusion Summon Norden, that can shuffle back the Black Sheep, that I can search again, then I can draw a card, and then I'm also going to play Brilliant Fusion with Garnet to have some more normal summons. I'm going to play Terror Top with a Taketenbor because that's going to give me more starters. Like, yeah.
Your Instant Fusion comes down and a Search Maxi afterwards, and the ever-growing popularity of 60-card decks to prevent grass interactions led to an interesting period of the game that would still remain a Tier 0 format, with Zoo at the clear center of it all. Beyond this, there were a couple of other changes that did come out of the ban list. Metal Foe Zoo was probably the hardest hit variant with the ban of Kieran, but it was still a powerful variant option with access to Balbaboon, and as such would double back on an old option of Cliffort Scout and Monolith to access Cyber Dragon Infinity with your opening board, in addition to the Zoo lines. Cosmo would also sneak back into Top Cut here with a similar list to the prior Tin Can Turbo variants, now also rocking Triple D Barrier as a way to lock out the Exceed onslaught. Anderson Sang would take the event on Infernoid Zoo, and even with the semi-limit and the rise in the number of players on 60 cards, the variant continued to be a solid choice for the current metagame, with every Infernoid doubling its TV Crow for critical combo pieces, and the near infinite recursion they gain from Grass. This would lead us into the next structure deck a week later, and seemingly the structure deck reloaded train was set to keep going, as we weren't just getting one this time.
I was wondering the same. Why was there a Future Fusion? Because I thought it was I guess if you survive a turn, then you can send all the Infernoids for Tierra.
The structure deck reloaded train was set to keep going, as we weren't just getting one this time, it was a duo.
Ancient Gear Wyvern.
Machine Reactor and Dino Masher's Fury. Release date, April 14th,
Oh,
2017.
Conductor. Okay,
Set
that's
type,
a relevant one.
structure deck. Major strategies, Ancient Gear, Dinosaur. Impact,
kick the baby! Don't kick the goddamn baby. Kick the baby! Wah!
Next up on the Structure Deck Reloaded train, we revisit the old structure decks of Machine Revolt and Dinosaur's Rage, two structures that were initially failures in promoting new decks to the scene, given a new chance at life here. Machine Reactor, without knowing the contents, probably held the most promise, as with the recent Ancient Gear support and rate, a little support going in the right direction could spell a meta stint for the longtime floundering archetype.
I'm pretty sure this
Ancient
shit's
Gear Wyvern on summon searches any Ancient Gear card except itself and locks you from setting cards for the rest of the turn with the monster effect stun on attacking. Gadget on summon gains a stun effect for a super type of your choice for all of your monsters that turn, and can make its name that of any Gadget monster until the end phase once per turn. Hydra, if summoned by tributing an Ancient Gear monster, banishes anything it battles but doesn't destroy, and if summoned by tributing a Gadget, can attack all monsters once each with a spell trap stun on attacking. Reactor Dragon deals piercing is tributed over an Ancient Gear monster.
Yeah, let's release a 2 tribute summon 2700 attack monsters that requires 2 specific tributes to even get its effects in 2017. Surely that's gonna be good.
And can attack twice if tributed over a Gadget, stuns spell traps when attacking, and pops a spell trap after attacking. Fortress gives Ancient Gear effect targeting and destruction prevention for the turn they're summoned, locks the opponent from responding to Ancient Gear cards and effects, and summons an Ancient Gear from hand or grave when destroyed, Xeno locking you to Ancient Gears when it does. Catapult, while you control no monsters, pops a face-up card you control to summon an Ancient Gear from deck ignoring summoning conditions, and can be banished from grave to pop a face-up card you control to summon an Ancient Gear token. A lot of disjointedness all around, and feeling more like it's trying to make up for the over-restrictive nature of past releases, Ancient Gear here feels less like trying trying to blaze a new path forward for the archetype with their new fusion support, and instead feels too focused on making some of the original high tribute pieces work, which ends up making the new cards fall flat immediately. Only one of these new
Thank you for the 8 months. I also don't believe you.
cards would even see any form of immediate experimentation, being that of Wyvern, being a Stratos for the archetype, meaning that the fusion burn strategy now had a searcher. As for Dino Masher's Fury, the direction was far more open-ended, as the original structure was more so just bringing an amalgam of dinosaur pieces together with no real rhyme or reason. Petita Pterodon would be a counterpart to the much older baby Ceratosaurus, able to summon a level 4 or higher dino from deck when destroyed by card effect as opposed to the original's 4 and lower effect. Soul Eating Oviraptor on summon either searches or pitches a dino from deck, and can pop a level 4 or lower dino other than itself to summon a dino from grave in defense. Ultimate Conductor Tyranno must be special summoned by banishing 2 dinos in grave, can pop a monster in hand or on field on a quick effect to Book of Moon the opponent's board, can attack all monsters once each, and if it attacks a defense position monster, burns the opponent for 1000 and sends it straight to grave. Lost World debuffs all non-dinos by 500, can summon a Jureg to the opponent's board when you summon a dino once per turn, locks the opponent from targeting dinos with card effects while they control a token, and can prevent a normal monster's destruction once per turn by popping a dino in hand or deck instead.
I mean, whether you're... It doesn't really matter if you're a fan of the dinosaur deck itself or not, but I feel like it's very fair to say that this structure deck is supposed to, like... This structure deck did exactly what a structure deck was supposed to do. Like, this was very... Like, especially in hindsight, for how it's worked out for the past couple of years after its release, like, this opened up a complete new... direction of dinosaur decks. Like it was a complete, like, I don't even know, before this dinosaur wasn't even really a thing, right? Like that they've just created an entirely new archetype pretty much that stayed in Yu-Gi-Oh for years and was usually quite accessible because most of its cards originated in the structure deck and were printed in lower rarities. It was a pretty accessible rogue deck for a long time, and this is exactly how structure decks should honestly be done. Like they should be doing way more structure decks like this one. I mean, the only dino deck before this was like what? Dino Rabbit, which was barely even a dinosaur deck. Like, yeah.
Dead. Just a quick reminder that tokens count as normal monsters. Survival's End pops as many normal monsters on field as possible to summon a level 4 or lower dino from deck up to the number destroyed, destroying them in the end phase, and can banish itself from grave to pop a dino you control and any card the opponent controls. There was also a new vanilla dino here with 2k attack named Megalo Smasher X, and a reprint of Rescue Rabbit in case Dino Rabbit was still on the brain. This new direction for Dinosaur was a bold step to say the least, and while it wouldn't make massive waves in the meta, it was still an extremely competent rogue level deck on the serious budget.
By the way, do we know what the next structure deck we'll get is? Next one is a Blue Eyes structure deck. That's actually seeing some play in the OCG where it's already out. So like the next wave of Blue Eyes support is genuinely not bad. The one after that, I don't think is announced yet, but I might be wrong. I don't think so.
Realistically, the deck was actually competent enough to make using 3 copies of the structure deck, a bold move in the face of the growing expenses of the Tier 0 metagame. Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, or UCT for short, was an incredibly powerful boss monster, and a quick effect blanket Book of Moon's power cannot be overstated, as Raijin was already seeing play being a single target version. Oviraptor promoted a gameplay loop of popping baby for baby, cycling baby Ceratosaurus mostly to flood the board with options to make big pushes, whether that be Exceed lines with Evolzars or Synchro lines with Jirac Aeolo. Speaking of which, Oviraptor also represented a 1-card level 5 synchro thanks to Misk from Wraith, able to search Misk on summon, immediately pitch it for Misk's protection effect, and then immediately after banish Misk to summon Aeolo from deck, with Oviraptor and Aeolo accessing a level 5 like Denglong. With almost all the ideal pop targets also being Earths, Lithosashum's name would be thrown into the ring, able to pop the babies to summon itself and potentially rip up the opponent.
This was arguably the scariest thing about the entire dinosaur deck, especially once they make Dragonic Diagrams soon. If they opened this thing with 2 babies, shit was going down.
Its extra deck, then trigger the babies in grave to swarm out more dinos. While I could go on, we'll leave it here for now, as Dino was a legitimate budget strategy at the time thanks to this structure deck, and because of that, though it wouldn't be nearly as successful as Zoo, it was quite beloved for the strategy it built at the time. YCS Bokura would be held the same weekend, and with it, not much would shift in terms of decks, representation, or builds here. Kanan Ashfor would take the event on pure Zodiac, still playing the Fusion sub combo, but notably trimming most of the fat to cut the deck down to 41 cards. At the start of May, we'd be graced with a new weekly Shonen Jump promo, this time being Apprentice Illusion Magician, a level 6 spellcaster able to summon herself from hand by discarding a card, searches a Dark Magician on summon, and can send herself from hand or field to grave in the damage step to boost a Dark spellcaster by 2000. While the two latter
The only time I ever recognized this card seeing play was before Illusion of Chaos came out. People used it to summon Magician Souls.
effects would rarely be used outside of specifically Dark Magician decks, Apprentice Illusion would see minor experimentation as a level 6 swarm tool for decks aiming to utilize the rank 6 pool, like Beatrice. This would lead into the next core set 4 days later, and though Zoo clearly had left its impact on the meta as a whole, another massive threat was on the horizon, and if you thought Dryden Pop was a good effect to make fast, you haven't seen anything yet.
Oh.
Maximum Crisis. Release date, May 5th, 2017. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Supreme King, True Draco, Zodiac. Impact, ending the era with a bang. Maximum Crisis would not only be a massive core set release that would reshape the metagame yet again, but would also be the final core set of the Arc 5 era. As such, a lot of anime-focused archetypes would see waves of support here, namely those focused around the final antagonist of Zark. So let's talk about Supreme King first. Supreme King was a new archetype of pendulum enablers for extra deck bosses, all aimed at summoning the new big boss Supreme King Dragon Zark. A fusion of 4 dragons, 1 fusion, synchro, exceed, and pendulum, nukes the opponent's board on summon, immune to effect destruction and targeting, cheats out a Supreme King Dragon from deck or extra when it destroys a monster in battle, and when destroyed in the monster zone moves to the pendulum zone, where it locks the opponent from using fusion, synchro, or exceed effects, and pops a card added from deck to hand once.
I'll be honest with you, I listened, but I did not comprehend what you just said.
Per turn. Obviously this was insanely powerful, but the caveat was it was an absolute pain in the ass to get out. As for other members, Gate 0 is the first ever scale 0, and the scale blocks damage to you while controlling Zark and can pop itself an infinity in the other scale to search Poly or a fusion spell. And
yeah, surely people are going to do that. They're going to play this with Zark, right? They're not going to do anything else with the Supreme King Gate cards? They would never.
On the field can pop itself and another monster you control to summon a dragon, fusion, or synchro from extra, dropping their stats to 0/0, negating their effects, and blocking it from being used for a synchro or exceed summon, and able to float into the pen scale when destroyed. Gate Infinity was the first ever scale 13. In the scale, lock pendulum summoning if you control the monster, and gains life from an opponent's monster's attack while you control Zark, and on field can pop itself in another card to summon a dragon, exceed, or pendulum from the extra, drop the stats to 0/0, and negate the effects and lock it from being summoned material, and floats into scale if popped. Dragon Darkworm in scale can activate a gate from deck, when summoned searches a gate, and from grave can summon itself if you control no monsters. Put bluntly, Zark was way too cumbersome to get out, but Gate 0 and Dragon Darkworm were actually really solid potential additions to the pendulum pile, namely for Darkworm being a level 4 Dark Dragon that searched a 0 scale and could be used with Foolish Burial. It checked all the boxes. Predaplant would get 2 new notable pieces in Orphis Scorpio and Darling Tonia.
I have a personal problem with Predaplant Orphis Scorpio. I hate this card. Because it's, I don't know, it to me at the time, this just felt like an extension of the things that I already didn't like. Because things that I already didn't like included Brilliant Fusion and Terror Top into an instant rank 3. And both of those come with bricks, which I hated to play in my decks. And this is all of those things combined. I hated this.
Cobra, who themselves formed a pseudo package. Orphis Scorpio on summon pitches a monster to summon a Predaplant from deck, and Darling Tonia Cobra, if summoned by a Predaplant effect, searches Polymerization or a fusion spell card once per duel. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the new Zoo enablers.
We have this as a tier 1 in Duel Links now. I don't know, dude. Whenever I play against it with my Sky Striker strategy, I fuck them up. I haven't lost to a single one yet.
While not as ideal as some of the other Zoo enablers thanks to needing the normal summon, the fact that they performed the Zoo setup and searched instant fusion made them an instant consideration, as now the massive combo was a 1-card combo, either by starting with Orifice or Lone Fire Blossom to access Orifice. Lyrilusk was a new series of level 1 Wing Beast aimed at swarming the board for quick exceeds plays. Cobalt Sparrow searches a level 1 Wing Beast on summon and gives a Wind Exceed its use to make targeting protection. Sapphire Swallow can summon herself and another level 1 Wing Beast from hand if you control a Wing Beast, and gives its Exceed the ability to attach a Lyrilusk from grave to it on summon. Turquoise Warbler can summon herself if you control no monsters and summons a Lyrilusk from grave on special summon. Assembled Nightingale is their key Exceed, taking 2+ level 1s, gains 200 attack for each material, can attack directly, can attack a number of times equal to its materials, and can detach on quick effect to prevent Lyrilusk from all destruction and battle damage. Lastly, Independent Nightingale is a fusion of Assembled and a Lyrilusk. If summoned with a Lyrilusk Exceed on field, boosts its level by the materials it had, gains 500 attack for each of its levels, and is unaffected by other card effects, and can burn the opponent for its level times 500 once per turn. And there's the reason Neptune had to be banned. By using Zoos to access King of the Feral Imps, one could search Neptune, summon Independent with Instant Fusion, and tribute summon Neptune over her, copying her effect onto itself and making it an unaffected 6,000 attack monster, at least, that could burn the opponent for 5k once per turn. Needless to say, this was not okay to have in the metagame, and thankfully it was banned before we got this interaction, but unfortunately this will not be the only time we mention this interaction this year. True Draco would be a counterpart archetype to the True Kings that have been rolled out slowly over the last few sets, being tied almost directly to the previous Draco Slayer.
Alright, before anyone says anything, I'll say it, okay? True Dracos are cool. Okay? Okay? True Dracos are cool. The problem with True Dracos is a similar problem that some other modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks have that are actually quite cool, like Runics. The problem is that they synergize too well with Floodgates, which is a problem, but the problem with True Dracos is mostly nowadays, or like in some years past their release, is that they were always played with Floodgates. The True Draco deck itself is so fun to play, like, and also like super interactive. The True Draco cards in their core, crazy cool. Crazy cool
Lore, able to tribute summon themselves by tributing continuous spells and traps instead of or in addition to monsters, with each of the important one tributes also having an effect when the opponent activates a card or effect after their tribute.
Just like kind of like Labyrinth. Now the one thing I will admit, the one exception is Masterpiece. Masterpiece was a mistake. But the core True Draco playstyle and identity is dope. It is just dope, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Masterpiece was a problem at the time, but these guys are crazy cool.
Summon, with Majesty Maiden searching a True Draco or True King monster, Ignis Heat searching a spell, and Dynamite Knight searching a trap, with Ignis and Dynamite also having the option to activate the cards directly from deck. Masterpiece would be the archetypal boss, being a level 8, so it needs 2 tributes, gives itself blanket immunity to the super types that it tribute summoned over, and can banish a continuous spell trap from grave to pop a card on field once per turn on a quick effect. In addition to their monster line, their spell trap line was almost entirely continuous spell traps, each of which has the ability to tribute summon an additional monster, with the spells being for your turn and the traps on the opponent's, each having a once per turn effect on field and each also popping a card on field when sent to grave, with the spells popping spell traps and the traps popping monsters. As for their unique effects, Heritage lets you draw. Kids
will love Heritage because of its immediate potential to draw like 2 or 3 cards. Grown-ups will love Disciples for its infinite grind game.
Draw 1 for every super type of True Draco or King sent from field to grave that turn. Disciples let you shuffle back 3 True Draco or King cards in grave to draw 1. Apocalypse lets you pop a True King or Draco to have the attack and defense of all opponent's monsters permanently. And Return revives a True Draco or King and locks special summon.
Why is Masterpiece so hated? Genuine question. I mean, like, it's fair enough for you to ask if you didn't play at the time, because from nowadays perspective, unironically, Masterpiece probably would be okay. in modern Yu-Gi-Oh to exist. It probably would be easy to out for most decks, and the one pop was like would be easy to be played around today. In 2017, usually when Masterpiece hit the board with the right combination of, like, you can combine either trap spell or monster immunity, it would just end a lot of games on the spot, because games were slower, and if you couldn't out it, it would just immediately start out grinding you, like popping a card every turn. Sometimes you would just die on the next turn, but it was just like a lot of situations where that thing would come down, you wouldn't be able to out it, and that would lose you the game. Simple as that. It was just like a little ahead of its time. Nowadays, unironically, like, I think the reason why people don't want it back is because they have like flashbacks from the time. They remember it like much worse than it actually would be today. But today it'd probably be okay. Paleo versus Trap Masterpiece. Yeah, I mean, Paleo just essentially, this deck, the existence of this deck in the metagame completely killed Paleo for two reasons. And I think the bigger one is not even Masterpiece. Masterpiece being trap immune is a problem for Paleo, but the even bigger problem was that this deck had an infinite flow of back row removal and an infinite amount of chain blocks as well. That was like, Paleo was unplayably bad into Draco. Like, if it was just Masterpiece, that was a problem that you could solve. Like, you could play like Kaijus or something like that. That was possible, but you could not outgrind this deck with Paleo. They would chain block you on every single action. They would pop one or two spell cards, one or two spell traps every turn. Infinite recursion. Paleo could not beat this deck if played properly. Like, it was just not possible
for the rest of the turn. Lastly, their field spell Dragonic Diagram boosts all True Kings and Dracos by 300, prevents tribute summon True Kings and Dracos from being destroyed once per turn each, and can pop a card on field or in hand to search for a True Draco or King once per turn. Put bluntly, this was the strongest tribute summon archetype ever conceived, and for good reason. For starters, the continuous spells and traps trading for cards when tributed over was insanely powerful, as they effectively maintained their on-field advantage simply by being fodder. Secondly, you could actually tribute over them while still set, meaning you didn't need to show your hand to the opponent before going in on a summon. Thirdly, the deck actively punished the opponent for attempting to push back, specifically thanks to Dynamite Knight, as if the opponent responds after he's on the board, he can activate True King's Return directly out of the deck, which then gives them the ability to reflood and keep going. Fourth, Diagram was unbelievably strong. The ability to pop a card in hand has for a while now been considered a very strong effect, even if the search is lackluster, and this one actually searches cards worth playing, able to add any and all cards in the archetype other than itself while providing blanket protection for all of the archetypal cards, meaning the opponent needs to burn more effects to remove, which can potentially trigger the True Draco response effects. Lastly, and certainly most importantly, Masterpiece was without question one of the most powerful boss monsters ever printed at this stage, with an effect similar to the already meta-dominant threat in Trident, blanket protection to 2 of the 3 super types in the game of your choice, and stats that could actually win combat effectively. Masterpiece was instantly one of the most powerful cards in the meta, and we will be talking about this further with an upcoming YCS. Zoodiac, as powerful as they already have been, actually would get another relevant wave of support here with not one, but 2 new relevant extra deck pieces. Hammer Kong has the standard Zoodiac overlay effect, blocks effect targeting to Zoodiacs while he has material, and must attach 1 in the end phase of each turn. Shaka 9 has the standard Zoodiac overlay effects, and can detach to revive a Zoodiac, blocking its effects and from being used as material for an Exceed summon for the rest of the turn. These two actually formed a decent loop in themselves, as you could detach Hammer Kong in a combo, revive it with Chaka 9 later, and then use Tiger Mortar to load a material onto it with its end phase detach being negated the turn it's revived, meaning that for the next turn, your Zoodiacs had targeting protection, specifically useful for keeping the Trident up for a turn, seeing played in the deck almost immediately. The TCG exclusives would each get a little more support to try and push themselves into the meta with their last efforts. Subterror would get Fiendus, able to discard herself or send herself from field to grave when the opponent activates a card or effect to negate that card and flip a Subterror face down, and can, on the field, flip a monster you control face down to summon a Subterror from hand or grave face down. And Final Battle, able to either flip up a Subterror, set down a Subterror, combine the attack and defense of a Subterror, or prevent the negation of Subterror effects that turn, setting itself back face down after being used instead of going to...
What's your favorite Subterror Final Battle effect? The My favorite part of Subterra Final Battle is that it resets itself. I think that is kind of cool. But other than that, I don't know. I have no beef with Final Battle. Final Battle is a cool card. I just didn't like the concept of. I guess the same thing that I just said about True Draco can be said about Subterra, because one of the major issues I have with it is how good it works with floodgates, right? But just the idea of like how Subterra's entire identity feels like it's just around like recycling an Omni Negate every single turn. I just like that less than the grind game of the True Dracos. I don't know.
Great. This last wave would actually be really powerful for Subterra, but unfortunately would do too little too late, as Subterra was just not in a position to make any kind of waves into the suppressive meta. As for Spiral, Sleeper must be special summoned by banishing 3 Spiral cards from grave, can pop a Spiral card you control and up to 2 opponent's cards on a quick effect,
that's foreshadowing.
And if destroyed, nukes your board and summons a super agent from hand, deck, or grave. Gear Last Resort can equip itself from hand or field onto a Spiral, prevents them from being destroyed or targeted, and can send a card you control to grave to let its equipped monster attack directly that turn. Gear Fully Armed can only equip to a super agent, boosts its attack by 1000, banishes a monster it destroys in battle as well as another card of your choice when you do, and when destroyed summons a super agent from grave. Mission Rescue recurs a Spiral monster once per turn, destroys itself after 3 of the player's end phases pass, and can be banished from grave to revive a Spiral monster. This support would actually be significantly powerful for Spiral, giving a legitimate option for actual presence on their opponent's turn with Sleeper, in addition to the insane amount of protection from Last Resort, and Rescue being a valuable card to pitch off of Quick Fix's revival effect. While still not powerful enough to be meta viable on their own given the much higher bar than when they started, Spiral was now at least competent enough to be considered as a splash engine for Zodiac decks, and potentially a meta pick once Zoo's reign ends. Moving on to the one-offs now. DD Ghost, if sent to grave, can dump an additional DD or Dark Contract from deck with the same name as one in grave, and if banished can return a banished DD or Dark Contract to grave except itself. While on the surface unassuming, Ghost would be a piece in a few different DD combos, being yet another addition to the spreadsheet. Zephrath in the scale can put a Zephyr from deck into face-up extra to change its scale to that monster's. Can only be summoned from face-up extra by tributing all monsters you control, including at least 3 Zephyrs. Gives an extra pendulum summon for Zephyrs the turn it's summoned, and contribute a monster to summon a Zephyr from deck. While a massive boon for the Zephyr archetype, what this would actually see play as was a modular scale for pendulum piles, as there were enough decent Zephyr pieces at this stage to play them to modulate the scales, then summon them back out for their benefits without fully investing into Zephyr as a whole. Fairytale Luna on normal searches a spellcaster with 1850 attack and can target an opponent's monster to make them either pitch another.
This is a big moment in hindsight for stun players. A massive moment in history when Fairytale Luna was released.
Copy from deck or extra, or bounce it once per turn on a quick effect. Luna would be a lot more niche than her sister Snow, but would still see some usage, namely in being a disruption tool that could actually search the aforementioned Snow. True King of all calamities would be the extra deck boss of the True King, being a rank 9 that can change all monsters on field to a declared attribute by detaching on quick effect. Also locking attacks and effects of monsters with that attribute for the turn, and allows True Draco and Kings to pop opponents' monsters for their effects. This would be a massive boss with a capital B, becoming an instant build towards for any deck utilizing multiple level 9s, of which the only deck for the time being doing such was Dinosaurs, who were already utilizing Lithosasham, able to take advantage of the secondary effect too, but would be a thorn for a long period of time after. Duelist Alliance searches for any Pendulum card if you have a scale activated, becoming a near staple for Pendulum piles after this, able to search a solid lineup of cards, including the ever-popular Luster Pendulum. Set Rotation takes 2 different field spells from your deck and sets 1 to each side of the field. This card was insanely powerful due to a few different applications. For starters, over the past couple of years, field spells have grown.
Okay. Name the 2 field spells that people used to give to the opponent that made them unactivatable. Gateway of Chaos was one of them, but I know there was 2, and I can't think of the second one. Oracle of Zephyr, that was the one. Yes, Oracle of Zephyr, right.
Grown in power substantially, almost to the point where finding them early could lock up a game on their own. So any deck that runs multiple field spell names would instantly gravitate towards this, but on top of that, there had been 2 field spells in particular released that have mandatory search conditions tied to them, those being Gateway to Chaos and Oracle of Zephyr. Because of the search being
rewatched, relived,
required, you cannot activate these if you cannot search. And if you set to your field spell zone, you cannot activate a new field spell over them until they are properly activated, meaning that against decks not teching a Zephyr, Blackluster Soldier, or Gaia the Fierce Night Monster, you could effectively lock them out of field spells for the game while setting up your own. Set rotation would become an almost instant staple for these reasons, and we'd be seeing this card for quite some time after. Tornado Dragon was a TCG exclusive rank 4 that can quick effect attached to pop a spell trap, being effectively MST on a rank 4, which was basically guaranteed to see play for that reason alone.
I think Tornado Dragon is a perfectly designed extra deck staple. Like, very good, not too powerful, and even these days I sometimes consider it for some of my decks. Not often, but sometimes.
Bujin Hiroko is a scale that can banish itself to exceed summon a Bujin over another Bujin exceed you control, seeing play namely for being a searchable low scale with Broad Bowl. Sylvan Princess Sprite is a rank 1 that can detach 1 to excavate 1, able to add it to hand if a spell trap, or send it to grave if it's a monster, and can send another plant from hand or face up field to grave to revive a Sylvan. A solid addition to the rank 1 pool, only held back for now by rank 1s being completely unfeasible in the game. Lastly, and probably most importantly for the long-term implications for the game as a whole, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring can be discarded to negate any effect that would search a card, summons a monster from deck, or sends a card from deck to grave on a hard once per turn. Ash was one of the most talked about cards from this set without question, being a blanket answer to any mass.
I mean, unironically, Ash might be one of the most impactful cards ever printed at this point, right? Because a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards will be good at the time, but then either get banned or fall out of favor at some point. This card has, I mean, almost always been a staple 3 of for the last, I mean, at this point, 7.5 years. Like, we're talking like that might be longer than like Mirror Force kind of nostalgia or relevance, right? Like Mirror Force, Mystical Space Typhoon kind of level of staple card, right? Which is crazy to think about. It's crazy to think about.
Combo that could go off, and was shockingly underwhelming on release. The problem stood that in the current meta, stopping one search or summon meant jack, as with Zoo running around, they would be spewing searches and summons left and right. But once the meta slowed down a little, Ash would find a home rather quickly. YCS Pits...
I mean, Ash was like, at the time, it just happened to not be as impactful against the best deck in the format, because it did not interact well with their normal summons, right? Like, if your opponent plays a normal summon and then you have an Ash, it won't interact with it well. It's not that the card was bad, it's just it wasn't a good time for it, or it wasn't the perfect time for it. I mean, right after Zodiac, I'm pretty sure people started playing Ash Blossom left and right. Like, that card was just very, very good. It's just like saying Ash was bad right there is like saying Effect Veiler was a bad card. Like, it's just like Effect Veiler was made, and immediately it was clear that card was a good Yu-Gi-Oh card, and it was going to be an option for a lot of formats to come. But like, similar to Effect Veiler, there were formats where Ash Blossom wasn't that popular in the beginning. So like, the card was good, people knew it was good. Yeah, no, I didn't understand it like you were saying it was bad. It's just like, the card was obviously strong, but in the beginning it had more niche applications, but people would side deck it a lot of the times. Like, people realized it was good, they would side deck it for a lot of specific matchups, like grass decks, Card of Demise decks. So like True Draco, you would usually want Ash Blossom in your deck against, because Card of Demise was a huge deal. Grass was a huge deal. A lot of decks, basically, you knew Ash was good against. So like, yeah. Yeah, Ash, I don't remember exactly, but it was like, I think it was around like a 40 to 50 euro card, which, I mean, that still is a popular, expensive staple kind of price range, right? Like, that's comparable to like a Molcharmy Perulia at the moment, which is like also very popular, right? Like, even though it doesn't break the main deck very often, like, that kind of price point indicates like a card that people realize is good, right?
Would be a week later, and
what do you want now, you creepy rat?
If there was any debate on if Zoo was tier 0 or not before this, there was no debating it now. Zoo decks took a whopping 32 of the top 32 here, and it was...
Is Zodiac the only deck to ever do that, by the way? I think so, right? I can't... Maybe Spiral? Did Spiral ever do that? No. Did Spiral do that? I don't think Spiral did that. Spiral did 31 out of 32. Okay, so close. But I think Zoo is the only one that ever did 32. I mean, to be fair, okay? To be fair, in a lot of these decks, like Zodiac, there is a big difference whether you're playing pure Zodiac, Draco Zodiac, Infernoid Zodiac, Paleo Zodiac, or even like Plant Zodiac. Like, they are different decks. They play the same kind of engines, but it's kind of like, it'll sound like a little bit of a silly comparison, but it would kind of be like going at a Top Cut breakdown today and be like, oh, 32 out of 32 decks are playing hand traps. So there's no diversity in the format. It's kind of like that, right? Like, not quite the same, but it's more like a sub-engine that, well, every deck can make use of it in some way. Or like maybe Fiendsmith is a better comparison, where like you have the Top Cut of the European Championship, and it's like, well, there's a lot of Snake Eye Fiendsmith, there's a lot of Yubel Fiendsmith, and then like majority of the decks are using the Fiendsmith engine, but they're doing different things with it. Yeah. So it's, I don't know, like, yes, the Zodiac engine is giga popular in this format, but does that make it a tier 0 format? I don't know, because those are definitely different decks. Like, Paleo Zoo is not the same deck as Draco Zoo, and that's not the same as Pure Zoo. Like, those are different options, even though they're playing similar engines. I don't know if you, like, from the traditional sense of play this one deck, I don't know if in the classic sense it would be a tier 0 format. Like, it's a tier 0 engine, rather. I think that's a better way to put it. Well, all those decks except Paleo Zoo play the exact same way. Now that's just cap, bro. That is just not true, right? Like, Draco Zoo tried to do different things than Pure Zodiac. Pure Zodiac was just like on the grindy game plan with more non-engine, more hand traps, more Forbidden Chalice and stuff like that. And like Draco Zoo was more like the true Draco cards, where, like, I mean, of course that like tries to play a different game plan than Pure Zodiac. Like, that is just not true.
It's clear that rather than pushing Zoo down, the new cards in Crisis only made the strategy even more potent. Pure Zoo had moved to include the new Shakanine and Hammer Kong package for their combo lines, with most builds resorting to new hand trap options, such as Flying Sea making an appearance here.
Like, this deck is gonna work and play fundamentally different than the Draco deck.
To help push Zoo back a little, and Ash Blossom to prevent getting +5 comboed for all of your life saving. The far more interesting development here, though, was in Draco Zoo, taking the event by Aaron Furman. The line between Zoo variants has begun to blur quite substantially, and this would probably be the best example of that, as now most builds were pure Zoo at their core, but would be classified based on their splashed-in engine of choice, with heavy IKS packages getting deemed as Kaiju Zoo, heavy hand traps as Pure Zoo, and a package of the new True Dracos as Draco Zoo. Access to Masterpieces nothing to scoff at, and standardly Zoo could actually do lines without the normal, then potentially provide both a continuous spell and barrage and an extra monster from whatever is left over post combo to commit into said masterpiece, making it monster and spell immune, with one of the only real outs to that in the format being a Kaiju. This direction would be one of the main—
He says Furman like Herman for some reason. I mean, it's Furman and Herman.
Focuses of the upcoming format, with the 3 primary Zoo variants fighting for dominance in the space. And with that said, a new ban list would come down the pipeline right at a month later, taking some of the more egregious options out of the meta for good. Newly banned was Elder Entity Norden, a hit that was long overdue at this stage, being the catalyst of many of the absolutely broken combos for Zoo decks. Newly limited were Terratop, the main enabler of the Invoker line, and That Grass Looks Greener, putting a hard cap on the power of the 60 card piles. Lastly, unlimited here were Skullcrabat Joker, Wisdom Eye Magician, and Pendulum Call, which couldn't be a more blatant buff to an upcoming release if they tried to make it so. Speaking of which—
Wait, Black Fang Magician? That came out then?
Pendulum Evolution. Release date—
Oh,
June
of course, yeah, the
23rd,
FTK. Yeah.
Okay, look, I'm gonna cut off the usual intro here because I have a major gripe with this specific set. Pendulum Evolution as a pack did not exist in the OCG. It was a complete structure deck over there. When importing it to the TCG, somewhere along the line, they decided that rather than bringing over the structure deck as is, it would be better to divide this solidly powerful structure into a set all its own in the TCG, making the copies of new cards no longer guaranteed. Luckily, it played out a lot better here than it could have, as nothing was short printed and the new cards were actually decently easy to get a hold of. But the practice itself was
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I understand your point, like why that be considered a bad thing, but I don't remember any of that stuff being expensive. Like, I think that set was just, like, not as bad for the game, because, like, I remember everything being cheap.
Without question suspect, and unfortunately this practice would become more and more commonplace as we entered the next era of the game, taking price-efficient structure decks and splitting them up into import sets for profit.
In general, it's not a great thing to do, though. I agree with that.
Practice they haven't
like,
done
it worked out in that case, but in other cases, I'm sure there's examples where it kind of hurt.
Since the Upper Deck eras for good reason. Pendulum Evolution would be an import set exclusively targeting the OCG structure deck of the same name, being a massive wave of support for both the existing Pendulum Magician archetype, but also towards the recent cover card of Maximum Crisis, Zark, providing a
also,
new...
someone asked what was the price of Zodiac on release. It was quite expensive because Barrage was a secret rare, and it was the most expensive one because that was the one that everyone played as a 3 of, even in Zodiac decks that only splashed Zodiacs. Like, that card I think was like 70 or 80, even could even be more in certain times. Trident and Broad Bowl were both secret rares as well, which were usually the ratio was 2 to 3 Broad Bowl, 2 to 3 Trident. So you needed, like, total for Zodiac, you needed around 7 to 9 secret rares. So you were talking definitely over $200 for those. No, wait, I miscalculated. The Barrage alone is over $200 for the play. Over $300 for those secret rares. And then you needed some ultras, like Thoroughblade was like a couple bucks. Like, it was the Zodiac engine itself, I would guess like at least 350 or 400 for the core of Zodiac. And then you still needed your other, you know, the rest, whatever your staples, basically, right? Your staples, your Terratops, your Invoker, that kind of stuff. So, like, you can imagine, like, you know, it's, and this is really the thing, like, in some ways, this has always been like this in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's just like the stuff that happened with, like, Snake Eyes and stuff is, like, kind of what happens every time. Well, which doesn't make it better, I guess, but
way to access the boss. Each of the 4-dimension dragons would get a Pendulum Magician counterpart. Double Iris is always treated as a Pendulum Dragon card, and Scale can pop itself to double the battle damage of a selected Dark Spellcaster that turn, and if destroyed, searches a Pendulum Graph card. Black Fang is always treated as an Exceed Dragon card, and Scale can have an opponent's monster's attack and pop itself, and if destroyed, revives the Dark Spellcaster. White Wing is a tuner, is always treated as a Synchro Dragon, and Scale can negate a card on resolution that targets a Dark Spellcaster and pop herself, and if Pendulum summoned and used for a Synchro summon, banishes herself. Purple Poison is always treated as a Fusion Dragon card, can pop itself in Scale to boost a Dark Spellcaster by 1200 for a battle, and pops a face-up card on field if destroyed. There was also an updated version of Yugioh's Tuning Magician, being Harmonizing Magician, who is unable to be summoned from extra deck, and when Pendulum summoned from hand, summons a Magician Pendulum from deck, negating its effects and banishing it when it leaves the field. Astrograph Sorcerer and Chronograph Sorcerer are the two outliers here, tied to the two original...
These two are giga broken, by the way. All the other ones were fine design-wise, good cards, but, like, nothing too crazy. These two are insane, especially Astrograph. Obviously, like, Chronograph's also good, but Astrograph is nuts.
Pendulum Magicians of Stargazer and Time Gazer, which each having a scale effect to pop themselves to either scale or summon one of the original two. They share an effect to summon themselves from hand when a card is destroyed that you controlled, with Astrograph searching another copy of a monster that was destroyed that turn, and Chronograph summoning a monster from your hand. They also share an effect to banish themselves and one each of a Pendulum Dragon, Exceed Dragon, Synchro Dragon, and Fusion Dragon between hand, field, and grave to fusion summon...
Bro, I did not even know they had that effect. It's like, it's crazy. I'm looking at it now and it's like, yeah, okay, these cards have a lot of text on them. They didn't need all that text, dude. No one's ever done that.
Supreme King Zark from the extra deck. Star Pendulum Graph gives blanket spell targeting.
And don't even bother telling me in chat that you did that once. Like, I summoned Zark with Astrograph. No, you didn't. I won't believe you.
Protection to your spellcasters and searches a Magician Pendulum when one leaves the field once per turn. And Time Pendulum Graph gives blanket trap targeting protection to your spellcasters and can pop a Magician Pendulum monster on field or in scale and an opponent's card once per turn. Lastly, Time Star Magician is a Magician Pendulum locked rank 4 that can detach to add a Dark Spellcaster from deck, grave, or face-up extra to hand. And if a Pendulum card would be destroyed once per turn, can dump a Spellcaster from deck to grave instead. Okay, so there is a lot to unpack here, but starting out, this support was insane. The new Magicians actually did a lot to iron out some of the natural weaknesses of the previous Pendulum Magician decks. From mass summon negates like Strike being outed by Black Fang's Revive, harmonizing...
I mean, didn't literally 2 of these guys get banned? Am I misremembering? Astrograph and Double Iris were banned, right? It's like a wave of 6 or 7 or 8 cards, and 2 of them were banned. Like 25% of the new support ended up having to go on the ban list. It's kind of crazy.
Allowing quick and easy Synchro and Exceed access by itself while also setting up names, to Double Iris being able to search Time Pendulum Graph to set up easy disruption going into the opponent's turn. With the release support from the ban list, it was clear Konami was trying to push this deck to be a deck to beat for the WCQ season, and probably just for the WCQ season, as at this point, we as a player base knew what was going to be coming in July with the new era of the game. But for now, let the Pendulum players have their fun and look at the pretty flowers. Diving into the WCQ season, Central America would kick us off, and unsurprisingly, Zodiac continues to absolutely dominate the space, but not quite as dominantly as before, with a more pure variant of True Draco starting to creep in here, which unfortunately we do not have lists for due to poor coverage. Pedro Benjumea would take the event on Zodiac, with the main pivot being seen from the ban list being dropping a bunch of the random combo enablers with the banning of Nord, seeing the slots filled with more hand traps like Ghost Reaper that didn't quite make the cut before, as well as more zoo names like Ram Ram. The EU WCQ would be the same weekend, and similarly we'd see a rise in the more pure True Draco variants into the meta, but similarly we've lost most of this event's coverage from the
Well, this one I went I remember this one I went X1 or XO on day 1, and then I lost like 2 or 3 rounds in a row on day 2. It was a rough day 2.
EU website changeover. As for what we do have, Pendulum Magicians would see their first top here, utilizing the Zodiac cards not only for their simple 1-card combos, but also for Barrage's pop effect triggering the effects of the Pendulum Magicians to generate advantage. Marshall Barbary would take the event on pure Zodiac, going completely undefeated with a 17-0 record, once again trimming the auxiliary engines for a tighter zoo-focused package, but notably playing copies of Shuffle Reborn as another option to start combo lines using Rat's Dump from deck,
yeah,
or to
Shuffle
keep going
Reborn
if your line got interrupted by some...
Basically, the entirety, like the quote-unquote thing in Zodiac format was just... Everyone played the Zodiac engine, and I'm like in the mirror matches, right? In the mirror matches, everyone played the Zodiac engine, and it was all about how can I make sure that I'm the one who can summon their Trident through my opponent's Trident. So all these cards like My Body as a Shield, Enemy Controller, Book of Moon, Forbidden Chalice, they were all here to make sure that you can play through your opponent's Trident and through your opponent's non-engine. And Shuffle Reborn was just another one of those cards that would allow you to, if you normal summon and your opponent Tridents it, you can Shuffle Reborn back your monster, right? Like that, just one of those kind of cards. But yeah, it's kind of cool.
Like Ghost Ogre, also being extremely useful against the floodgate of Flying Sea that had been popping up more and more by shuffling it back into the opponent's deck to draw a card. Directly following this event, we'd also receive a new weekly Shonen Jump promo in Galaxy Eyes Cypher Blade Dragon, able to overlay onto a rank 8 Galaxy Eyes, can detach to pop a card, and when destroyed floats into Galaxy Eyes Cypher Dragon in gray. Solid new support piece, adds a pop onto the original.
Isn't 50% of Galaxy Eyes support just another Exceed that you can put onto the other Exceeds? Yes? Okay.
Cypher Dragon steal and floats back into it when destroyed, making it a solid addition to rank 8 decks, with the
Would
only
be more
issue
than
being
50?
there were not
Oh.
any good rank 8 decks at the time. Oceania was a couple of days later, and unfortunately this event, as usual, is the WCQ we know the least about, only having a confirmed top 8 breakdown, of which Pure True Draco would once again crack, and thankfully this time, we have a deck list. Utilizing all sorts of special summon blocking consistency cards like Duality and Demise, True Draco could completely circumvent that thanks to their extra normal
See, so
summon.
like technically, this deck has a lot of really cool stuff going on. It's just one skill drain and the 2 masterpieces that are kind of troll despair, but the skill drain was limited, so they didn't draw it very often. Other than that, it's like it's kind of cool.
Being normal summon, able to stick a quick dino.
And the thing is, if you've played this deck at this time, you will like genuinely know that this deck could go head to head with Zodiac even in games where you didn't have access to skill drain or masterpiece. Like this deck was a good deck even in the grindy games. Like it was a solid engine against Zodiac. Like it matched up well against them.
Knight into Masterpiece, completely dominating a game, playing a decent suite of responsive cards.
Like for example, I played True Draco at YCS Rimini that year, and I got 3rd, and I'm pretty sure that I only played 1 Masterpiece with Desires because it genuinely wasn't an issue if you lost your Masterpiece after Desires. Like it was not a problem. It didn't rely on that card.
Their tribute summon bosses, such as Forbidden Apocrypha to take out Zodiac combos, and Monarch Stormforth to take advantage of the quick summon trap. Ryan Slott would take the event on Zodiac, playing a very similar list to the EU WCQ winning list, Shuffle Reborn included. South America would be the same weekend, and we'd continue to see similar results to the other WCQ, seeing a nearly identical
This is kind of like, there's always that one Wind Witch invoked kind of meme.
Central America, ironically enough.
There's
Rafael
always that
Jose
one
Rodriguez
Wind Witch
de Souza would take the event on Zodiac, playing the pure variant that has, by this point, been mostly solidified. There would be one more set release between this and the NAWCQ, and this particular set would bring one specific reprint we had been waiting on at this point for quite some time.
Perform a Pal Odd Eyes Synchron.
Battles of
Time
Legend
Lords.
Light's Revenge. Release date, July 7th, 2017. Set type, import, reprint set. Major strategies, pendulums, dinosaur, Time Lords. Impact,
Minerva.
the long-awaited reprint of a meta-relevant prize card. Battles of Legend, as the name suggests, would be a successor to the Dragons of Legend packs that we've received up until this point for the past 3 years. After 3 Dragons of Legend sets, all of the dragons had been printed, and needing it to remain an import set for various OCG releases we simply didn't get, specifically those of the Collector's Pack series at the time, and needing a set in which we could receive reprints and erratas for specific cards, the Legend sets would be transitioned into the Battles of Legend series, which as of the time of writing this is still an active yearly series that continues to see printings. As such, while this isn't technically the inaugural set, as technically it's the 4th in the series of the Legend sets, it would be what marked the official start of taking the yearly sets more seriously, as this one started to actually do reprints for the meta at large that actually mattered. Quickly running through the imports, Pendulum Piles would see a couple of new pieces in Performapal Odd Eye Synchron, being just a mesh of archetype names for searching that can also be used to convert your scales into synchros, and Abyss Actor Curtain Raiser, able to summon itself out of scale if you control no monsters, being the only relevant effect it had, but still a solid one. The Time Lords would see their archetypal debut, being a continuation of the previous Medion the Time Lord, which were all
Time Lords were really, really cool tech cards at the time because they could really mess with certain boards depending on which kind of, because they were immune to like Trident or whatever, right? And you would just crash and clear certain parts of your opponent's board. It was pretty cool.
Boss monsters that can normal summon for no tributes.
They were very popular side deck cards.
Return themselves at the end of the battle phase. They battle.
This thing just gets rid of all spell and traps. Like this card was really good against like True Draco and Zodiac versions, depending on how much back row they played. You just summon Saphion, attack, and shuffle all their spell traps away. Like, it's really good, and they can't do anything about it. Can't pop it with Masterpiece. Can't pop it with one of the True Draco traps. It was really good.
To the deck for some effect.
They have faces on. Yeah, that throws me off every time. Like literally, when you look at these as like just the card, you never really notice this. When you look at the artworks up close, it always freaks me out that they have like faces in the most random places.
or in your standby phase for no effect, and standardly had a reason to not remove them stapled on. Honestly, these were never truly relevant, though they would see the occasional pop-up in rogue-level stall strategies that never saw any real success.
The Time Lord deck was never relevant, but these cards were very relevant.
Giant Rex is able to summon itself if banished once per turn and gains 200 attack when you do, and Double Evolution Pill banishes a dino and a non-dino from hand or grave to summon a level 7...
Mentions odd eye synchron as relevant, says Zafion, isn't it? I'm pretty sure I cited multiple Time Lords at Worlds in 2017 with the Time Maiden as well. They were very relevant side deck cards.
Or higher dino from deck, ignoring summoning conditions. These two would be a pseudo pair for dinosaur decks, with Rex pairing nicely with Misk for summoning out a baby for max value, and Double Evolution Pill being a sort of break glass option to get yourself to UCT without burning a search. Both would see tech level play in Dinosaur for now. As for the reprints that need to be mentioned, there would be two relevant ones for the time being. Minerva, after her 2-year stint of being a price card exclusive extra deck staple, was finally released to the public. While the period she would have been massively relevant had passed with the limiting of grass, Minerva still would be a welcome addition to the extra decks of the average player. The other reprint that needs to be mentioned, albeit briefly, is Witch of the Black Forest, who would receive the same errata as Sangan as a hard once per turn, and locking the effects of that monster until the end of the turn, making her a prime candidate to return to the game on the next ban list. The NAWCQ would wrap up the WCQ season the same weekend, and while our dataset is incomplete, the results on hand would be fairly similar to other WCQs from this season, with Pure Zoo and Draco Zoo standing atop the meta at large, with Chester Henson taking the event on Draco Zoo, which had notably departed from being a splash of True Dracos into a pure Zoodiac deck, and instead was now a splash of Zoo cards into a mostly pure True Draco deck. Zombie Zoo would be one of the more interesting tops here thanks to the return of Grass. With Left Arm Offering still available at 3 copies, the deck can still
Dude, JY Sharif looking ass deck.
effectively operate with 4 copies of Grass on hand, just 3/4 of the time requiring a hand banish to get there. This would lead into the year's starter deck, and with it would come a fundamental shift to the game as a whole that many players weren't quite ready for in many ways. Link Strike. Release date, July 21st, 2017. Set type, starter.
Okay, now we've got to have the Link Monster talk, guys. We've got to have the Link Monster talk. It's here, dude. Multiple years of recaps, and now we're at Links.
Deck. Major strategies, Cyburst, Link. Impact, a shock to the core of the game. Link Strike would be the precursor to the first set of the new era, and with it would come the new extra deck monster category of Link Monsters, and a shift to the game's rules colloquially referred to as Master Rule 4. With this change, the pendulum zones would be removed from the board, instead now treating the left and rightmost spell trap zones as your pendulum zone, and new zones above the center left and center right columns would be added known as the extra monster zones. With this change, from now on, a monster summoned from the extra deck would now be required to be summoned to either an EMZ or to a zone the new monster category of links have an arrow pointing towards. This meant that overnight, fusions, synchros, exceeds, and pendulum summoned from the extra deck no longer could be used in the capacity they have been standardly for the past 15 years of the TCG, and that change would cause a massive amount of backlash upon initial announcement among the more casual bases of the game.
So I'll say, like, I mean, saying this change was controversial is probably even an understatement at the time. But, like, I almost want to say there were maybe 2 camps in this situation. Like, there was obviously the one side that just didn't want this change to happen and viewed it more as like they're trying to shove Link Monsters down our throats. They're trying to force us to play these new cards and stuff like that. I don't like that. I just want to keep playing my synchros and all that. I don't want to play those new cards. And I don't want to be forced to play those new cards. And so they hated it before it even happened, to be honest. Like, a lot of the people they weren't even interested in even trying whether the game would get better or worse. They would just be like, you know what? I don't want that to happen. I'm not going to try it. I'll just, like, fuck that. And then the other camp was more like, I'm gonna, because there was at the time, which it might sound weird from today's perspective, but at the time there were already concerns about the game turning too fast, which seems to always be a thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! And power creep. Like, every year people are like, okay, now it's getting out of hand. Like, people said that in 2008 when Phantom Darkness released. People said that in 2013 when Dragon Rulers released. People also felt that way in 2016-17, right? With like pendulum combos and Zodiac combos and stuff like that. People were like, okay, the game is getting faster and faster. I would like it to slow down. And technically, the extra Monster Zone inclusion into the game did do something in that direction, right? It was, yes, of course, it encouraged the use of Link monsters, but it also did at the beginning, before the Link monsters turned broken, it did slow down like the combo potential and all that kind of stuff. Did that necessarily make the game better? I wouldn't say so, because like it just so happens that the top decks at the time, like Zodiac and True Draco Zodiac, didn't care that much. Like, you could argue the first version of Zodiac, the one that tried to do like fusion sub combos and stuff with multiple rat peers and tried to summon multiple exceeds, that version of the deck would have cared way more about this change, and it would have slowed it down. But the way people play Zodiac at this point in time is already like way slower, right? Like, people already try to do like Trident plus Masterpiece or something, which doesn't conflict at all. Like, people literally just kept playing Zodiac at first with this change, right? It was just like a slightly different version, because you couldn't do everything that other versions of the deck could do, but like True Draco Zoo was still possible. Trident Pass with some non-engine was still possible. It didn't change fundamentally, right? Like, it was, yeah, I don't know. So my opinion at the time, which is all I can really do, is give you the context of how I felt about this. I always try to look at changes to the game in a positive way. And I thought like, okay, well, if they're trying to slow the game down a little bit, that's fine by me. I didn't really care that much. I was like, you know, whatever, let's just see, because I'm the type of person, I don't care which cards they force me to play, because I'm going to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh anyways. I'm going to play with the newest cards most of the time anyways. Like, you know, like that's just how it works for me personally. So that part didn't really bother me. All I care about is it good for the game? Like, does it make the game better or does it make the game worse? If it makes the game better, even if I have to pick up new cards for it, I like it. But that is obviously subjective. I definitely see where people are coming from that are like, okay, but now my Synchro deck is virtually unplayable. And that is my favorite deck, and I want to play it, and that sucks. And that is also completely fair enough. Did it make the game better in the long term is an interesting question, because that is, I mean, I think those are two different questions, because Link monsters themselves did not like ruin the game or anything. It's just that how they overpowered some of those Link monsters was definitely not necessary. And not always were Link monsters good for the game, right? But like, the thing that you have to realize is like, the Link mechanic was always going to be the most generic extra deck mechanic, just by design, right? Link summons are the easiest ones to do because they don't require a specific type of card. You don't need a tuner, you don't need two cards with the same level, you don't need, you know, scale setup. All you need is monsters on the board and you can access your extra deck. In my opinion, what they didn't do properly was realize how dangerous that sort of mechanic is and how important it is to balance those cards properly. And that, I think, is not inherently the fault of the Link mechanic. It's more so the fault of the people that made the Link mechanic and then did not design cards properly for it. So, like, I don't know. I think the change itself is fine, although I think the way we have it right now is still better. I think when they went back on this, was this Master Rule 5? I always mix up those numbers, but the one where now Link monsters have to go into the extra monster zone, but synchros, exceeds, and stuff like and fusions can go into any zone is good, because ultimately the thing you need to realize is that the rules we play by, of course they matter, but they don't matter in the sense that you can make broken cards and you can break the game no matter what rules you play by. even if link monsters didn't exist, they could be printing cards that would be insanely broken and break the game and power creep the game and all that kind of stuff. No one is stopping them from doing that, only because theoretically link monsters weren't existing, right? Like they did that before link monsters too. We looked at formats where freaking game-breaking cards come out that completely dominate the format. That happens before and after links. It's always about like how you design cards more than what the rules of the game are, because no matter what the rules of the game are, you can either design balanced cards for those rules, or you can design cards that are completely bonkers and broken. It's always more on the card design aspect than the whole like the rule set of the thing. Like they could have just not made some of those broken ass link monsters and it probably would have been fine all the way through. Of course, yes, there are some mechanics that are more dangerous than others. That is also true. The link mechanic is the most generic one, so it's the easiest one to quote unquote fuck up with, right? Like it's the easiest one to make a mistake and be like, oh, we didn't see this one interaction that makes this card completely broken. But for the most part, when they're making broken cards, I personally think they know what they're doing. They want that card to be that good. And sometimes I disagree with that decision, right? I sometimes think you shouldn't be making cards that are purposely that broken.
Effectively made many strategies completely unplayable under these new rules. As for the new links, each have a summon requirement and a link rating, sending monsters equal to the link rating to the grave to perform a link summon, which you can use a link monster as multiple monsters equal to that monster's link rating, or as just one. These links have two distinct features that made them heavily different from previous monster categories, those being a lack of defense value, meaning the monster could not be played in or changed to defense mode, and the addition of link arrows to the card itself, which denotes what additional zones can be used to summon extra deck monsters to while on the field. At this stage, we only had 3 Link monsters, all sporting the new monster type of Cybers. Link Spider is a Link 1 that takes any normal monster, which can include tokens, and can special summon a level 4 or lower normal to a zone it points to from hand once per turn. Honeybot is a Cyberse locked Link 2 that gives monsters it points to battle destruction immunity and effect targeting protection. Decode Talker is a Link 3 that takes 2+ effect monsters, gains 500 for every monster it points to, and can negate an opponent's card that targets your card by tributing a monster it points to. On initial inspection, Honeybot was discarded immediately, Decode was slotted in as the token Link for decks to use, and Link Spider probably had the most talk surrounding it thanks to its ability to convert tokens into Link material, which brought back the classic DM era staple of Scapegoat into the conversation as a massive Link material swarm, but also Go Through the Vague Shadow became a 1-card Decode Talker with Link Spider converting the tokens.
The fact that that's even remotely worth mentioning is like, I mean, yes, it did that, but like a 1-card Decode Talker, really?
Which would actually see some play for this period. This initial week period of links wouldn't last long, as the next core set would release 2 weeks later, and with it, the Arc 5 era would come to a close, and a new era would begin, for better and for worse. Code of the Duelist. Release date, August 4th, 2017. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Trickstar, Goki, World Chalice. Impact, set.
Guys, guess what the most relevant Link monster in this set was on release?
Setting the tone of the next year. Code of the Duelist would be the first set of the new Vrains era of the game, and as such, it had a lot of pressure placed on it to deliver.
Because it's not Firewall Dragon.
Or die. As with the previous era start, Duelist Alliance, the meta completely warped around its contents. So how did it do? Trickstar would be a new series of fairies aimed at winning the game in a death by 1,000 cuts scenario. Literally, as almost every Trickstar card would have a small burn effect added on as a reactionary effect to most.
I mean, death by 1,000 cuts or Droll Reincarnation.
Actions, or as an additional effect to their standard effects. Lilybell can summon herself if added to hand except by drawing, can attack directly, and adds a Trickstar from grave to hand on dealing damage. Lycoris summons herself on a quick effect by bouncing another Trickstar to hand, and burns the opponent for 200 every time they add a card to hand for each card. Candina searches a Trickstar card on normal, and burns the opponent for 200 every time they resolve a spell trap. Holly Angel is a Trickstar locked Link 2 that burns the opponent for 200 every time a Trickstar is summoned to its zone. Give Trickstars it points to destruction immunity, and gains attack anytime a Trickstar deals effect damage to the opponent equal to the burn until the end of the turn. Light Stage searches a Trickstar monster on activation, can lock a set
Light
spell
Stage is
trap
so
while it's on
powerful.
field until the end phase, at which point it forces the activation of that set or sends it to grave, and burns the opponent for 200 anytime a Trickstar damages them. Lastly, Reincarnation banishes the opponent's entire hand and has them draw the same number of cards, and can be banished from grave to summon a Trickstar from grave. Wait, what? Yeah, so if it wasn't obvious, there was a massive outlier in the Trickstar card effects, and that was specifically in Reincarnation. Banishing the opponent's hand, regardless of if they get a new one or not, is an incredibly useful and powerful effect to have in your arsenal. And that or not part is actually possible to pull off thanks to Droll Lockbird, a hand trap from all the way back in Starstrike Blast, able to lock the opponent from adding cards from deck to hand for the turn after they've done it once. A common concern would be to Reincarnation after the first search, then chain Droll, locking them from being able to draw after banishing their hand with Reincarnation, which almost never actually happened due to needing 2 specific cards to pull off, but was still a theoretical concern sitting in the back of players' minds. As for the Trickstars themselves, while a solid starting point was seen here and a clear direction for the deck was present, it was just too early to tell how this one was going to play out, though more solid support could easily push this deck into a meta contender. Goki was a new archetype of Earth Warriors that all share an effect to replace themselves with a search for any Goki other than themselves when sent from field to grave. Super X specials a Goki from hand on normal, Twist Cobra tributes a Goki on quick effect to boost another Goki by its attack that turn, and Rescorpio can normal summon with no tributes if you control no monsters or all Gokis. Great Ogre is a Goki locked Link 3 that debuffs all monsters' attacks by their defenses, and can pop a card it points to instead of itself on an attempted destruction. Lastly, Rematch can
It's a lot of foreshadowing in this set. Looking back at it now, little did we know when this set came out, right guys? Little did we know.
Summon 2 Gokis from grave with different levels in defense mode. An incredibly simple archetype on paper, but the ability to cycle for other monsters when sent from field to grave for anything made them an incredible set of cards specifically for Link climbing, or using as continuous material to make higher and higher Link monster ratings. While not quite there yet in terms of support to be meta, it was clear that this was going to be an archetype to watch in the coming months as more support comes down the pipeline, as it was clearly going to be one of the better decks for summoning Links with. The Supreme King archetype would get 4 new variants of the Dimension Dragons. Odd Eyes and Scale contribute a Supreme King monster to pop itself in search of 1500 or less attack Pendulum from deck, contribute 2 Supreme King monsters to summon itself from hand, doubles the damage dealt by pendulums battling monsters, and contribute itself in the battle phase to summon 2 Supreme King Dragon or Gates from face-up extra deck. Dark Rebellion is a Dark Pendulum locked rank 4 that can detach in battle to steal the attack of its combat target, dropping that monster to 0, and can return itself to extra in the battle phase for the same summon effect as Odd Eyes. Clear Wing is a Dark Pendulum locked level 8 synchro that nukes the opponent's face-up monsters on summon, pops a monster at battles to burn the opponent for its attack once per turn, and can summon itself from grave by tributing 2 Supreme King Dragon monsters. Starving Venom takes 2 Dark Pendulums, can summon itself from the extra by tributing materials, can copy the name and effect of any monster on field or in grave for the turn, and deals piercing damage for the turn that it does. These 4 were all pretty solid additions to the Pendulum Magician deck at this stage, all being easy summons with incredibly powerful effects, but one of these was bound to cause problems. Starving Venom's effect was almost identical to the previous Tyrant Neptune's, meaning that the assembled Nightingale burn line was once again available, and far easier to pull off now as a proper FTK, as Starving Venom's effect copy is not a hard once per turn, with each copy able to burn for 4000 damage, only taking 2 to end the game. Luckily, this was held back a little by the recent Master Rule.
You know what the most frustrating thing about this entire combination even was? Because if you remember, Nightingale does 500 times its level, right? It was exactly 8,000. Had they just thought about it for one moment, this could have been a level 7. Then it would have been 3,500 times 2. They could have made Nightingale 400 times the level. Then it would have also not been 8,000. No, this had to be a level 8. And Nightingale had to do 500 per level. It's just so annoying that it was exactly 8,000. Like, there's just certain type of effects in Yu-Gi-Oh that you have to be more careful with than others as a card designer. Like, if you have the ability to copy another card's effect, you need to be careful with that. You need to take the time to look through the card pool and be like, hey, which card could maybe become a problem if I copy its effect? Or maybe you slap a once per turn on that thing. All of those things, realistic ways to, you know, solve the situation, but rather, you know, they just don't do that.
4 changes, but was bound to be an issue in the future if not handled relatively soon. DDD would get a few more combo pieces to add to their ever-growing arsenal. Ice Typhon can tribute a DD on normal to summon a level 7 DDD from deck, and in Grave can fusion summon a DDD by banishing materials from Grave, including itself. Gust King High Alexander is a level 10 synchro that gains 3k if there are 3+ DDD.
Smith foreshadowing, let's go.
DDs on field, and can revive a DD when another DD is summoned once per turn. Wave High King Caesar is a fiend-locked rank 6 that can detach to negate and destroy anything that special summons a monster, then boosts itself and another DD by 1800 that turn, and searches a dark contract when sent to Grave. A lot of new powerful options for the DDD pool, but unfortunately was held back massively by the new Master Rule changes, needing some kind of easy access link to do anything.
Yeah, DDD just got completely destroyed by that rule.
World Chalice would be a pioneer in what I'm going to refer to as the lore archetypes, those being a series of multiple archetypes all tied together under a centralized lore that plays out over the course of multiple years of the game. As for this one, the archetype is centered around 3 normal monsters and crowned, chosen, and beckoned by the World Chalice, which are important for this in that they are normal monsters with World Chalice in their name. Guard Dragon can be sent from hand or field to grave to negate anything that targets a linked monster, meaning a monster that has a link arrow pointing to it. It can be
Is bro chewing on sphere mode, by the way? That's not sphere mode, right? Surely not.
banish from grave to summon a normal monster in grave to a zone a link monster points to. World Legacy World Chalice would be the first of the new World Legacy archetype, meant to be an anchor archetype between the various lore archetypes that will be trickled out over the coming core sets. It can tribute itself when a monster is summoned from the extra to send that monster to grave. If it leaves the field after being normal summoned or set, summons 2 World Chalice monsters from deck, and can be banished from grave to search a World Legacy card. Imduck
is this the start of the lore plague in Yu-Gi-Oh? I mean, not really. Not really, no. I mean, we've had lore decks before this, but I guess what you're referring to is like, yeah, lore decks that would receive continued support over the period of like a year or two. Yeah, I guess, kind of. But like, I mean, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. The way I would say it is like, at least the way I remember it, this was like the first time that like main sets, right? Main Yu-Gi-Oh sets introduced something that had a lore behind it, and that lore would be carried out over like a year or two or even longer, right? Like World Chalice, Branded, or like Albaz, you know, Visa Starfrost, and now Diabell Star, that kind of stuff. Like those lores, I mean, if bro, just tell me what other ones you can think of. I'm not saying it's the only one I can. This just I'm saying it's the only one I can think of that went for this long. Because like other like Shaddoll, for example, right? Shaddoll didn't get support for that long, and Zodiac also didn't get support for that long. I'm not saying they're the first lore decks, guys. You're not listening. I'm saying they're the first ones that got continued support over and over and over and over for like 2 years straight. Not like I am aware that other decks have lore behind it. All right, like I know that. Like, but I mean, like the ones that they made in the main sets. Like, sure, like surely you can see the difference between like how Visa Starfrost was handled and how Shaddoll happened back in the day, right? Like Shaddoll were introduced, and then they got some support in like the next 1 or 2 sets, and then maybe, I mean, years later they got more. But like the Shaddoll deck as it was like finished after a couple of sets. Whereas like Visa Starfrost went on for like almost an entire year. It's like Diabell Star right now still getting support after like Snake Eye is over a year old at this point, and we're still getting Snake Eye support cards. That kind of stuff, right? Like the first Snake Eye cards, when did the first Snake Eye cards come out? End of 2023, right? Like before YCS Bologna 2023, we got we already had Snake Eye Ash and Diabell Star, Age of Overlord. Technically Duelist Nexus, right, with Subversion, but that it wasn't really a lore deck at that point yet. But like that is over a year now, and it's still gonna get more support even in 2025. right? Azamina, Supreme Darkness. So like, that is definitely different from how they used to do it back in the day. And I think World Chalice might be one of the first examples of that, where like they started with Code of the Duelist, and World Chalice just got more and more pieces every single set. For I don't know how long. I don't know how long. And that is something that, I mean, it depends on the lore whether you like it or not. But I certainly think it's another one of those things that's, I think the concept behind it is cool. I like that, you know, decks come out and they're not immediately dropped after 1 or 2 sets. You know, like, I think it is usually worth it for a cool concept to keep working on it set after set after set. It is a dangerous thing, though, when the deck is already strong from the get-go. Like what we're experiencing with Snake Eye at the moment, for example, right? It's dangerous because Snake Eye was already good on release and it just doesn't stop because they keep making more and more and more and more stuff that goes into Snake Eye decks. And so, like, if you're not a huge fan of Snake Eye, well, shit, because it's been the best deck for the entirety of 2024. There was not really a moment in 2024 where Snake Eye wasn't the best deck, except for that brief period in time between a ban list and Rage of the Abyss, right? And that was like, it doesn't even matter if you like Snake Eye or not. That's not what it's about. It's more about, like, from a competitive balancing standpoint, domination is something that happens very easily when you set yourself. I feel like you set yourself up for trouble in that kind of scenario sometimes. I think other examples though are like fine. Like this concept can work out fine. I'm gonna. Some of you are gonna disagree with me on that, but I think Branded is a deck that was a good example of this. Because Branded was actually done properly. Because the way they did Branded, and once again, try to detach this from whether you like Branded or not. Like, it's okay if you dislike Branded, but Branded was never too oppressive from a competitive standpoint. It was always a good deck, and the cool thing about it, conceptually, was that it evolved over time. Like Branded didn't come out and was the same deck for 2 years straight. Branded got new tools. They took away some stuff on the ban list. They printed new stuff to play with. Like, it was an ever-changing concept over the course of, I mean, even up until this point. And it's always been fine. Individual cards are obviously a problem, right? Like Sanctify or anything. But just in terms of power level and relevance to the metagame, Branded was always well designed. Like, it was a fan favorite because it had a lot of lore to it. The artwork was cool. You could tell that there was a lot of energy put into its design and all that kind of stuff, and it was never too oppressive. Disregarding whether you think the deck is cool or not, it was never too oppressive, and that's a good way to do those kind of archetypes, as opposed to Snake Eyes.
There's a link one that takes specifically a normal, lets you extra normal a World Chalice once per turn, destroys anything it battles that it points to, and summons a World Chalice from hand when sent to grave. Ib is a link 2 taking different types and attributes, can't be destroyed and has targeting immunity while linked, can send itself to grave to protect a monster she points to, and summons a World Chalice from hand when sent from field to grave. Arum is a World Chalice locked link 2, gains 300 for each different World Chalice in grave, contribute a World Chalice it points to summon another monster from grave to a zone it points to, and floats into a World Chalice in hand. Ningirsu is a link locked 3, draws cards up to the World Chalices it points to on link summon.
Ningirsu, coolest World Chalice card, no competition.
Can send a card from each field to grave once per turn, and floats into a World Chalice in hand. All in all, a solid intro course to links as a whole, but the archetype was severely lacking any kind of a real payoff to do anything other than be a tutorial deck for now. Lightsworn would get a whole new sub-archetype playing into their identity as history's #1 chaos enabler, being the Twilight Sworns. Dark attribute counterparts to Lightsworn.
Twilight Sworn, biggest disappointment that I can think of right now in recent years in terms of an archetype. As someone who liked Lightsworn a lot back in the day, Twilight Sworn were so incredibly mid. Like, such a terrible concept, man.
Focused on banishing rather than milling. Jane can banish a Lightsworn in hand to drop a monster's stats by its level times 300.
Cool name though, yeah, but that makes it especially frustrating, right? Like, who doesn't want to play with the Twilight Sworn cards? Like, the concept is so cool. Like, oh, you know this light archetype, that very iconic light archetype from years ago. How about we give it a dark retrain? Like, oh, that's so cool. And then they all suck, dude. They all suck, man.
2 if another Lightsworn uses its effect once per turn. Lila can banish the Lightsworn in hand when a spell trap is activated to pop a spell trap on field, and mills 3 once per turn when another Lightsworn effect is used. Lumina can banish a Lightsworn in hand to summon a banished Lightsworn other than Lumina, and mills 3 when another Lightsworn effect goes off. Raikou on normal or flip can banish a Lightsworn in hand,
and like the only one that's even remotely being used is Lumina Twilight Sworn Shaman because it can FTK with the old Lumina. How cool is that?
or Grave to banish a card on field, and mills 3 when another Lightsworn effect goes off. Punishment Dragon, being a counterpart to Judgment Dragon, can summon itself if there are 4 different Lightsworn names banished, can pay 1,000 to shuffle all Graves and face-up banishments into deck on a quick effect, and mills 4 when a Lightsworn effect goes off. March of the Dark Brigade recurs any Lightsworn with a level, then banishes cards from the top of deck equal to its level. Twilight Twin Dragons can recur a Judgment Dragon.
Dude, Charge of the Light Brigade was one of the best cards ever printed at the time. Like, relative to its time, it's one of the best searchers printed. And then 10 years later, you make March of the Dark Brigade, which is just an unplayable Yu-Gi-Oh card. Like, come on, dude.
Dragon and mill 4 if you control Punishment Dragon, and can recur a Punishment Dragon and banish 4 off the top of deck if milled. Lightsworn has almost always had a place in the meta, from enablers to its own dedicated strategy, so this support would be welcomed in quickly, though Lightsworn wasn't quite viable at this point in time. A new set block means new TCG exclusives, and this round we'd see a fairly interesting new take on rituals with Vendread. The primary gimmick of the deck is to revive their zombie main deck pieces in order to use them as ritual material, passing effects from them to the ritual monsters in question. Hound Horde can discard a Vendread card to revive itself, and if used from field as ritual material, lets its summoned monster quick effect banish a spell trap once per turn. Revenant revives itself when destroyed, and if used from field as ritual material, lets its summoned monster quick effect banish a special summoned monster once per turn. Slayer is the starter ritual monster here, able to banish a zombie in grave to boost itself by 300 in battle, and if sent to grave can dump a Vendread monster from deck. Revendread Origin is the starter ritual spell, able to banish zombies in grave as material in addition to the standard ritual summon, and can be banished from grave to protect Slayer specifically from destruction. Reorigin tributes an opponent's monster with the level to summon a token with the same level, locking you to Vendreads while on the field. Vendread had an interesting first wave for sure, but was far from meta viable at this stage, requiring a couple more waves to get going.
The only thing that I literally, at this point, I know at certain times I thought Vendread could become good if they do proper support for it, as we do with all of these archetypes. But the only thing I know Vendread for now is ruining my card guesser runs, because for some reason there's a bunch of cards that have the same name, but it's just like Vendread Origin, Re-Vendread Origin, Vendread Slayer, Re-Vendread Slayer. And I'm just like, dude, I'd rather skip this card than try to guess which one it is.
But a small detail here that would be a welcome sight was the fact that despite Origin being a generic ritual spell for Vendreads, by mentioning Slayer in a separate effect, it was, in fact, searchable with pre-preparation of rites, being a trend we'd see more commonly with ritual archetypes in the future. The other TCG premier archetype here was FA, being a successor to UA in many respects, namely in its lore.
Hey, you all exist just to give us Dawn Dragster. How does that feel?
Or an art style. Each FA gains attack from its level, can boost its level by 1 when an FA spell trap is used, and gains a new effect once their level goes to 7 or higher, with Sonic Meister able to attack twice a battle phase, and Hang On Mock putting a one-sided macro effect on the opponent. Circuit Grand Prix increases FA levels by 2 in the battle phase only, draws a card when an FA wins combat, and searches an FA card when destroyed by card effect. Downforce boosts an FA's level by 2 for a turn, and can be banished from grave to do the same. Well,
Hi, I've installed the game yesterday and haven't played since being a kid. Is it worth getting the Evil Twin bundle? I've got a bunch of free gems. The Evil Twin bundle is only worth it if you like the field that comes with it, if you care about cosmetics, because in terms of just packs to open, you get less than if you were just buying the packs directly. So you got to know for yourself whether that's worth to you. If you just want to get cards, then you shouldn't get it. Because you're paying extra gems just for some cool cosmetics. They do look nice. It is cool. But if you're just trying to get as many cards as possible, it's not ideal.
While definitely interesting, restructuring the rulings on monster levels, now able to go above 12, FA wouldn't see play here, needing a lot more support to even be considered at all.
I wish someone told me that 2 damn days ago. I hate cosmetics. See, Nesh, that's okay. We're a beginner-friendly stream here. You can come in here and ask these kind of questions all the time. You're welcome. Feel free to ask.
Rescue Ferret can summon exactly 6 levels of monsters from deck to zones a Link monster points to, with their effects negated, and destroys them in the end phase, being a far more generic version of the previous rescue monsters but requiring links to be fully usable. Spellbook of Knowledge can send a spellbook or spellcaster from hand or field to grave to draw 2, effectively turning the previous Blue Boy and Spellbook of Secrets into a normal summon Pot of Greed and deck.
Are we still on Coda the Duelist? Holy shit, how many cards?
Thinner, with Blue Boy or Secret searching the other searching Knowledge, and converting the Blue Boy into a draw 2. As for the proper introduction of generic links, we'd have 3 here worth talking about. Firewall Dragon is a link 4 with generic materials, can bounce monsters on field or engrave to hand once while on field up to the number of its co-links, meaning that link monsters it points to that also point back to it, and when a monster it points to is sent to grave, lets you summon a monster from hand, notably with no once per turn restriction. This was a massive problem card, and the community knew that the moment this card was released, being one of the most overtuned protagonist ace monsters we've seen since Stardust.
Did we know that on release? Because I'm pretty sure we couldn't use it on release very well. It definitely took some, I mean, it didn't take long, to be fair. I guess it might have been one of those moments where you look at the card and you're like, yeah, I know this is going to be a problem. I just don't know exactly when. Yeah, probably that. Right? No, it was like, the thing is, it was probably more like, oh, this card is very broken, but we can't use it yet. And there were some gimmicky decks for it, right? Like even some gimmicky decks used it right away, I think, like the World Chalice that won a YCS. But like in the grand scheme of things, it took some time. But once, I mean, we probably knew that this was going to be a problem.
The fact that it let you just empty out your hand to use as link materials, then immediately do it again from that, was recognizably busted and was so generic that it was bound to cause some kind of an issue in the future, clearly being a catalyst for some kind of FDK in the near future once we got a couple more generic links. Topologic Bomber Dragon is another generic link 4 that nukes the main monster.
Topologic Bomber Dragon, to this day, is one of the coolest link 4s they've ever made. This card is so nice. This is what link 4s should be. And you can't convince me otherwise. This is what link 4s should be in terms of interaction and stuff like that. This is what people should climb into. Not freaking Firewall Dragon or Topologic Gumblar Dragon, those kind of cards. Like, nah, this card is dope. Zeroboros is also cool. The whole concept of those kind of cards is so fun. It's so fun. It didn't FTK. Yeah, but that was not his fault. That was not Bomber Dragon's fault. Come on.
Zones when a monster is summoned to a zone a link monster points to, and burns the opponent when it attacks a monster for that target's original attack. Bomber Dragon was a go-to boss for this period of the game, able to lock a zone from the opponent and constantly threaten a board nuke with any summon, seeing play for these reasons initially. Lastly, as a way to ease the player base into the idea of using links, the attribute stat boosters from Metal Raiders would be retrained here into generic attributed links, seeing one released per core set for a period of time. Mrs. Radiance would be.
And there you go. There you have it. The most relevant link monster from Code of the Duelist on release. Would you believe it? Mrs. Radiant. And why was it the most relevant link? Because it was good in Zodiac. And all the other ones, we didn't have the tools to use them yet. So there you go. This little mid-ass card was the most relevant link in it, because you could now use you could make it in Zodiac to boost your stuff and summon 2 exceeds.
The first being the Earth link, boosting Earths by 500, debuffing winds by 400, and can recur in Earth when destroyed. Why is the Earth first? Why on earth would you print the Earth first? So remember how people thought that
come on, it wasn't the problem though. Like, Zodiac would have been the best deck without this card, and it didn't come up that often. Like, it was okay.
Links were going to be good for slowing down the game thanks to making decks unable to spam out extra deck monsters anymore. Why don't we just instantly invalidate that point by releasing the piece that fixes that issue for exactly Zodiac? We'll talk more about this in a second, but we've got a Worlds to cover first. The 2017 World Championships would be held a little over a week after Code's release on August 12th, and notably,
we won't talk about this one, thank you.
Master Rule 4 would be in effect, but the only legal sets with links in it for this event would be the Link Strike starter deck, heavily hampering many decks, meaning that decks that use 0 to 1 extra deck monsters at a time would be heavily preferred here. Also, extremely notably, Zoodiac was not at all a viable option here, as Dryden and Broad Bowl were banned and Rapier was limited in the OCG, taking the TCG Tier 0 threat off the table. Another point of note here would be the single unknown slot on this pie chart, as in top 8, Hayama Shunsuke of Japan, the 2-time reigning world champion, would be disqualified for slow play, which resulted in us not getting to know his list as it was never shown on the stream for the event. With all of that said, Tsujimura Ryosuke
I'm pretty sure it was Dinosaurs, by the way, the deck that he played.
of Japan would take the event on True King Dino, being without question the best performance the deck had seen thus far thanks primarily to the conditions of the event. The deck didn't really care if it couldn't have more than one extra deck monster out at a time, as primarily the only 3 you'd ever summon on the first turn would be Denglong to get the counter trap, or Trishula to hand rip and then summon all Calamities. A lot of Dinosaur's power lied in the main deck with Lithosasm and UCT, so it wasn't too big of a surprise to see it do well here. The 2017 Megatens would come down just 2 weeks later, and as usual, reprinted the core sets of the last year, with the most notable reprints here being those of the Zoodiacs, getting a full core reprint. In addition to this, the promo slots would bring a couple of new cards as well, bringing Proxy Dragon, a generic Link 2, and Elder Entity Intis, a counterpart to Norden that was not nearly as good as Norden, able to pop a card when sent to grave from anywhere, being useful for cards like Necros Kaleidoscope that dump from extra deck. YCS Toronto would be that same weekend, though unfortunately due to poor coverage we do not have a top cut for this event. Chris LeBlanc would take the event on True Draco Zoo, marking his 3rd YCS win and placing the player in spitting distance of Billy Brake's record of 4 wins, seeing very little changes to the deck as a whole for the new Master Rule 4 outside of a singular copy of Missus Radiant to enable multiple zones. LeBlanc would also be the recipient of the new YCS prize card number 89, Diablosis the Mind Hacker.
Troll
a rank
despair,
7 that can detach to banish a monster
dude.
from the opponent's extra deck face down, can banish a card from the opponent's grave face down at the end of the battle phase if it won combat that turn, and can banish the top of the opponent's deck face down up to the number of their face down banished cards once per turn, being seen primarily as a dissuasion from running Pot of Desires while it was in play. YCS Rimini would be held the same weekend and
Oh shit! Alright!
Zoodiac was once again nearly uncontested as the Tier 0 mega threat it's been for the last 8 months, taking 24 of the top 32, including the event piloted by Andreas Vrelos. With Konami releasing Missus Radiant immediately in code,
Bro, was there really that few True Dracos, dude? 2 True Dracos? I got 3rd at this one, by the way, with Draco.
mega threat it's been Vrelos. With Konami releasing Missus Radiant immediately in code, Zoo completely ignored the Master Rule 4 change, pivoting themselves into a Tier 0 mega threat yet again, and unless something was done about it soon, we were in for yet another Zoo format. With the game hemorrhaging players at this stage, the next release needed to do something to stop that bleeding and bring in new players soon, or we'd be seeing a doomsday scenario that many feared would be the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! As we knew it.
Bro, saying the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! As we knew it and then showing a picture of Amazon as baby tiger is crazy.
Legendary Duelists. Release date September 8th, 2017. Set type Duelist Pack. Major strategies Red Eyes, Amazonas, Cyberdark. Impact Anime support with little impact. Legendary Duelist would be a reshift of the previous Duelist Pack series, focused on providing support to various anime character decks in a single location. For this inaugural set, we
I can't even think of a single relevant card in this.
Legendary Fisherman, Mai's Amazonas, Bastion's Chemical.
And ironically, this set did nothing in the TCG, but I'm pretty sure all 3 of those previous cards, well, before Cluster, the Red Eye Slash, they just dominated Duel Links, all 3 of these.
Beasts, Zane's Cyberdarks, and Cyrus's Roids, all of which would have no meta impact at large, but was still quite notable, as this pack series would be a recurring sight in the coming years for any and all decks seen from the anime getting a facelift with new support. The September 2017 ban list would take effect 10 days later on September 18th, and with it, massive changes would be felt across the game. Newly banned were Daigusto Emerald, Denglong, Dynamite Knight.
It's crazy that Daigusto Emerald suffered for Zodiac sins, by the way. That is crazy behavior.
Grand Soil, Lithosasm, Broad Bull, and
Grand
Trident.
Soil.
Newly limited were Ignis Heat, Miscellaneousaurus, Ratpier, Dark Hole, Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, True King's Return, and the return of Gateway of the Six from the banned section.
Oh, no.
Newly Semi-Limited, and all coming up from one, were BLS, Bryonic, Luster Pendulum, Mathematician, Hyper Librarian, Brain Control, Burial, El Shaddai Fusion, and Preparation of Rites. Lastly, Unlimited were Debris Dragon, Honest, Rescue Cat, Summoner Monk, Witch of the Black Forest with her new errata, Charge of the Light Brigade, Dragon Ravine, and Wavering Eyes.
Alright, get lost, all of you. You're fired. Go on, scram. Get out of here, you moochers. That's right. Keep moving.
You know what? Yeah.
Except you stay.
Without question, this ban list was aimed at absolutely destroying the meta of the last 8 to 9 months, with a Culling Blade coming down onto specifically that of Zodiac, seeing its 2 core extra deck pieces banned, and Rad, a card that needs to be at more than one copy to operate the way it wants to, limited. True King Dino, being the deck that won Worlds, was bound to get hit too, and losing Lithosasm and Denglong would be critical losses as well as the limiting of Misk, though could still be useful thanks to Overraptor being able to search it. True Draco looked like it was also hit pretty bad, losing Dynamite Knight and...
I still wish at least Dryden would come back. Honestly, I'm a little baffled by the fact that Dryden isn't back yet. Because I feel like the Master Duel situation clearly proves that that card would not really matter. And in a lot of ways, if you look at modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like Dryden would be a super healthy card in Yu-Gi-Oh, as opposed to Broad Bull. I think Broad Bull cannot come back, but I think Dryden and even Barrage, like those cards are just completely fine. They are just completely fine and even healthy. Those kind of like one normal summon turning into a Dryden is completely reasonable. Like it's just reasonable and fine.
Most copies of Ignis Heat in return, but with Masterpiece sitting completely untouched, the deck was far from gone. Following that would be a super minor release, being the Legendary Dragon decks, being a set of 3 pre-constructed decks themed to the 3 Legendary Dragons, Cyber Dragons, and the 4 Dimension Dragons, bringing 1 new card for each, being Dark Magician the Dragon Knight, Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon, and Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon. Of these, the only one to see any kind of use was Mega Fleet Dragon, able to turn a Cyber Dragon into a removal for anything in the extra monster zone, leaving a 2400 attack monster in its wake. YCS Guadalajara would be held the same weekend, and with the culling of Zoo, the meta would shift rapidly, with Pendulum Magicians filling the top deck position. Taking the event piloted by Gabriel Romo, Penned Magician received a massive boon from the last ban list, taking out its primary competition and even playing well through the Master Rule 4 change thanks to the raw power of the new Supreme King Dragons and the ability to get your materials back to hand.
Unironically, you guys won't like what I'm about to say, but at that time, the only thing I felt during Pendulum format was I want to go back to Zoo and True Draco. That was my only feeling during this format. I'm gonna keep it 100 with you guys. During Pendulum format, all I wanted to do is go back to playing against Zodiac and Draco, like 100%.
The Pen Summon. True Draco would continue to see success thanks to the lack of hits towards Masterpiece, still being at 3 with 3 diagrams.
And the new version of True Draco was also a lot more cringe than the previous one, because now it's like anti-spell for Pendulum and Masterpiece Turbo, because the other pieces got banned and restricted, like,
making him incredibly reliable to establish still. Trickstar would see its first top here thanks to the Wind Witch engine, as by setting up your lines using just a normal summon, the deck doesn't mind locking its specials for the turn in exchange for an indestructible Crystal Wing, especially when the Droll Reincarnation combo is accessible. Spiral would see its first ever pure YCS top here, with the realization that Link solves Spiral's main issue, getting
Wait, Spiral topped before Double Helix? That's so based. That's impressive, even. Okay, I mean, I'm looking at it. Doesn't look that bad, to be honest. The list looks fine because you can now link off your you can link off your stuff. It looks kind of bricky though, to be honest.
Master plan on and off the board. By utilizing quick link climbing tools like Gofu and Quick Fix with Machine Dupe, accessing Firewall was a simple task, which could cheat out Master Plan and then link her off the board to trigger all of her searches on the same turn. This really
is that Wadapon on the side. People were scared as hell from about that Pendulum FTK. Yeah, I think that's why that's there. Like there was the Pendulum FTK that they mentioned earlier with Independent Nightingale that was running around in this format, And yeah, people were afraid of that.
Realization would make Spiral a serious talking point for the meta at large, but this was about to get a lot worse, as the next core set was just around the corner, and a certain set of imports was about to come to us far sooner than we were ready for.
Evenly matched.
Circuit Break. Release date October 20th, 2017. Set type core set. Major strategies Rocket, Altergeist, Crawler. Impact out of one tier 0 and into another. Circuit Break would be the final
Double Helix is also in there.
core set of the year, and with it would come primarily support for strategies introduced back in code with a couple of new additions sprinkled in. Rocket would be one of the new archetypes, being a series of dark dragons focused on effects that pop themselves for some form of advantage, though the initial wave of monsters here left a lot to be desired. However, there were two pieces here worth talking about. Borreload Dragon, the boss monster of the archetype, was a
This is another one of those rank force, link force that is incredibly cool. This is where Link Force peaked. Topologic Bomber Dragon, Borreload Dragon. That's what I want Link Force to be. I don't want no Appaloosa, Access Code Talker. I don't want those. I want Borreload Dragon. Maybe Boral Sword is fine. Topologic Bomber. Those are the days, dude.
Generic Link 4 taking 3 or more effect monsters, had targeting protection from monster effects, can drop a monster's stats by 500 on a quick effect that's unrespondable, and when attacking a monster can steal it to the zone it points to, sending it to grave at the end of the turn. This would become a staple rank 4 in the pool, a growing roster to be sure, but this would be one of the most reliable ways to win combat.
Boral Sword, yeah, maybe Boral Sword, like nowadays Boral Sword would be fine, but like back then it was kind of broken.
And potentially push massive amounts of damage.
I just like that this card didn't promote like, it wasn't that great going first, and going second, it didn't promote like OTKing. It was more like a back and forth kind of situation with Borreload. Not just I win the game immediately, right? It's more like I out a certain card that can't be destroyed or something like that. I take it, and that's cool. Like, you know, like you would like against Thunder Dragons later, a couple years, like you would still play Borreload to take like Colossus and stuff like that.
In one go. The other would be Quick Launch, which summons a rocket from deck and pops it in the end phase, which would be considerably better once we receive good standalone rockets. Altergeist was the other big archetype here, being a series of monsters that form resource loops with their trap cards. Marionetter sets an Altergeist trap from deck on normal and can send an Altergeist card from field to grave to revive another Altergeist. Silquitus on a quick effect can bounce an Altergeist card and an opponent's card, and if sent from field to grave recurs an Altergeist trap. Meluseek can attack directly, can send an opponent's card to grave after dealing battle damage, and if sent from field to grave searches an Altergeist monster. Prime Banshee is an Altergeist locked Link 3 that contributes an Altergeist to summon another from deck to a zone it points to, and when sent from field to grave recurs an Altergeist card. Camouflage equips itself to an Altergeist, preventing it from being attacked and negating anything that targets it, and can be banished from grave to protect an Altergeist from destruction. Protocol prevents the negation of Altergeist cards and lets you send an Altergeist from field to grave to negate a monster effect once per turn.
I don't know, I like Altergeist. It's another one of those for me that I like the concept of the deck, and then Floodgate Synergy is just an unfortunate side effect.
Spoofing shuffles an Altergeist.
Like, why are they all spellcasters so that they can play Secret Village, stuff like that.
Card from hand or field to deck to search an Altergeist monster once per turn. While not quite there yet in terms of power level, Altergeist showed some real promise with this initial wave, with Meluseek and Marionetter forming a decent line of disruption, with Meluseek being removed resulting in Marionetter setting up a trap and bringing back Meluseek to keep going. Goki would receive Headbat, with the standard Goki search, and could send another Goki from hand to grave while in hand to summon itself in defense and boost a Goki on field by 800. More importantly for Headbat was that it could summon itself if a Goki was on field, making it an excellent swarm option for the Link-focused deck. Amano Iwado brings spirits back into the game, locking all monsters except spirits from activating their effects. Some players would tinker with this as a way to block hand traps, while others would look for a way to prevent Iwado from activating its effects either, locking its return to hand effect and keeping an effect lock on the board. Destrudo the Lost Dragon's Frisian, for a cool half of your life points, can either summon from hand or grave if you control a level 6 or lower, lowers its level by that monster's, returning to the bottom of deck when it leaves field after this effect is used. Effectively able to turn any low-level monster into a level 7 Synchro, Destrudo would be a very hotly desired option for many decks for both AFD and Yazi combos. Especially now that Yazi for Mare actually did something rather powerful in flooding the board with Link materials, being a 1-card Firewall Dragon. Akashic Magician is a Link 2 requiring the same type monsters and no tokens. can only be Link summoned once per turn. On
Akashic's
Link
also
summon
really
bounces
cool.
all monsters she points to, and can declare a card name to excavate cards up to the number of monsters co-linked to her, adding all copies of the declared card to hand and milling the
I mean,
red.
the main use of this card was in the Danger FTK. That's the main one I played it in, but it was pretty good in that one.
Akashic would be a solid addition to the extra as a piece repeater, situational disruption, and at worst, a generic Link 2 that points down, being played for all of these reasons. Miss Starboy would be the water generic Link.
I love Miss Starboy.
Debuffing fires and recurring a water.
Not only did he go into Paleozoics, I'm also 100% convinced that he's the coolest out of these Link 2 attribute ones. He's definitely the coolest, right? I'm not tripping. It's not just because I played him in Paleo. I'm not biased here, right? He's definitely the coolest.
On destruction, being not as useful out the gate as Missus was, but still solid for water strategies. Metaverse either searches or activates a field spell from deck, being a great option for
Which field spell am I going to activate?
A counter field spell for various strategies, such as Necro Valley and Secret Village. Evenly Match can be activated at the end of the battle phase and can be activated from hand if you control no cards, forcing the opponent to banish their board face down until they control as many cards as you, which if you're using the from hand application is 1, because Evenly will still be on the board when it resolves. This was a massive tool for going second, something we haven't really seen in a long time for the game, being a way to equalize against a board that was able to fully set up. Lyrilusk Recital Starling is a rank 1 that can detach to search a level 1 winged beast, meaning that any deck with rank 1 access now could search DD Crow, which was actually shockingly relevant coming up here shortly. Number 41 Baguska the Terribly Tired Tapir is a generic rank 4 that detaches a material in your standby phase or destroys itself. In attack position can't be destroyed or targeted by effects, and in defense position changes all monsters to defense and negates the effects of monsters in defense. Baguska, commonly referred to as Plan B, was an extremely common sight in any deck that could make rank 4s moving forward, as if their playlines get interrupted, you could always make a defense position Baguska, which could buy you a turn to regather your resources. Lastly would be 2 OCG imports that we were not expecting to be brought over so soon, being the OCG additions to the last 2 TCG exclusive archetypes, notably being brought over months earlier than usual, as we usually expected to receive them in our Gold Series styled sets, like Duelist Saga earlier this year. Subterra Behemoth Fiendus was a flip
not that
Link
one.
2, gain
Not
attack
that
for
one.
every Subterra level used to make it times 100, can dump a flip monster from deck to summon a monster from hand face down to a zone it points to once per turn, and if a card its point to is flipped, you can either search or recur a flip monster.
Yeah.
This was incredibly powerful support for Subterra, with the only real drawback for it being the lack of enablers, with so much of the archetype being high-level bosses, causing Fiendus to see no real play out the gate. Spiral Double Helix was a spiral-locked Link that becomes Super Agent on field and in gray. Can declare a card Super Type to check the top of the opponent's deck, and if called right, searches or special summons a Spiral from deck or grave. This was beyond incredible for Spiral, solving the main issue present with the strategy, that being access to Master Plan and Super Agent on a whim, as it was considered Super Agent on field and in grave, making the strategy a complex powerhouse that was bound to make an impact at the next YCS. And YCS Dallas would be held the same weekend, and instantly Spiral became the new Tier 0 mega threat, taking 29 of the top 32, including first place piloted by Imran Khan, who played a mirror match against his brother of all peoples in the finals.
Oh yeah,
the deck was an advantage machine thanks in large part to Double Helix giving quick access to Master Plan and for being considered Super Agent, which in turn allowed the deck to cycle copies of Quick Fix for extra searches, which could be used to cycle them more, providing link material to climb up into Firewall Dragon in multiple quantities, or can even be used to access more niche options like the new Recital Starling to search DD Crow, Sylvan Princess Sprite to potentially get a spell trap draw, or
this deck, dude. Oh, man.
Dullahan to answer a large attack threat. This would also primarily be one of the first true showcases of how powerful Link summoning actually was, especially in the case of a deck that didn't have planning around it to begin with. As more so than Synchros or Exceeds, Link's as a summon mechanic had a host of monsters that would prove to be problematic due to being designed long before the concept was even talked over for the first time. As for what, if anything, could compete with Spiral at this state, the answer was not a whole lot on their own, but a couple of decks did manage here. Trickstar would crack into the top 32 thanks to playing a suite of 13 hand traps, with the primary goal being to stop—
Wait, did we count Honest? There's no way. What, 3, 6... Okay, no, we didn't count Honest. Okay, I was about to say.
Up a Double Helix push before it got massively out of hand, Because of all the searching that was going on with Spiral, both Drolan Lock and Ash Blossom were prime candidates, which in turn meant that the Reincarnation Lock had a far more natural place in the current meta space than previously. The other deck that cracked in was Invoke, quite notably taking advantage of the variety of hand trap attributes to make their fusions, and the lack of need for main deck space to
Oop, nah! I misclicked. I misclicked.
if anything, could compete with Spiral at this stage into the top of the natural advantage of the variety of hand trap attributes.
I just wanted to pause because there's no driver. Where's the driver? Driver, hello?
To make their fusions, and the lack of need for main deck space to absolutely load up on hand traps to stop the new Tier 0 menace. One option that would appear here would be that of set rotation, taking the Oracle of Zephyr approach to lock the opponent out of Spiral Resort while also setting up your own magical meltdown, which gave the invoked player a serious advantage by locking Spiral out of a critical piece of their support. YCS London would be the following weekend, and a very similar show.
Oh, dude, I went 9-2 at YCS London with Spiral and got 35th. And we did like 35th or 36th. I don't know exactly, but like it was top 32. It was very sad.
Be present, with Spiral once again clearing the Tier 0 threshold with 27 of the top 32 spots. Taking first place piloted by Jesse Cotton, a player who had been a familiar face in the field for some time now, taking 5 YCS tops and 7 Premier Event tops, but this would be his first YCS win. One of the more interesting inclusions here would be that of Psyframe Gear Gamma, which provided a layer of insulation at the start of your lines against hand traps, such as Ash Blossom being used against your 1-for-1, which in turn gets you 2 more monsters to use as link material in addition to your standard line. With hand trap heavy decks becoming the norm, a deck that would pull a surprising top cut placement here would be Burning Abyss, playing so many starters that hand trapping 1 or 2 of them was by no means a turn end, taking advantage of the meta landscape. Pendulum Magicians would top here as well, seeing a very similar deck comp to before, but now loaded up on hand traps for the Spiral matchup. Quite suddenly, a new ban list would go into effect on November 6th, just 1 week after London, believed to be an emergency hit to Spiral to prevent another Tier 0 domination, limiting Blackwing Gofu, Spiral Gear Drone, Quick Fix, and Set Rotation, limiting 3 of the most common play starters for Spiral, as well as one.
It is a relatively quick fix to the Spiral, but it wasn't enough.
One of the best counters against the deck, but whether this would be enough was still to be seen. 2 weeks after this list, we'd received the deck building set Spirit Warriors, which brought new support for 6 Sams and the Secret 6 Samurai, an archetype of quick play and trap cheating light fiends and magical muskets, and fairies that gain effects to their columns from their continuous spells and traps and weather painters. But none of these 3 would be anywhere near viable enough to crack into the meta at large, even with the supposed emergency list in effect. YCS San Diego was the same weekend as Spirit Warriors, and despite the hits,
I mean, it's like, it kind of like, in some ways, you could argue Spiral was very, very new, and they just turned it from the Tier 0 deck into just the best deck. If you want to be generous with them.
Spiral continued to appear as the dominant threat of the metagame, though at a state where others could now compete, or so it seemed on the surface. Faisal Khan would take the event with Spiral, being the brother of.
And this is the funny story, because I'm pretty sure he lost to his brother in the YCS, in the previous YCS, and then won the next one. There's also a pretty cool story.
The YCS Dallas winner that lost in finals a month prior, getting the run back of the century. Even with the deck hit pretty bad, the same line of master plan to search 3 is still an incredible power play, especially now that set rotation was limited, meaning getting locked out of combo was less likely. The final YCS of the year would be just a week later in Prague once again, receiving the title of Prague 2 to help differentiate. Raphael Nevin would take the event with Spiral.
This deck was dope. I played the same deck at this event. We built it together. I got 3rd, I think, or 4th. No, I got 4th. I lost the 3rd and 4th playoff. But this was blind second Spiral. And I think this is arguably the only good thing to be said about Spiral format, is that it genuinely wasn't, at that point, it wasn't just go first and win anymore, because the deck was that weak to hand traps, and Gamma was that good, and Evenly was that good, and Cherries was that good, that like there was a blind second angle to it. And we played blind second Spiral, and it was actually very, very cool.
showcasing how even though the deck was more in line now, it was still undoubtedly the best in the room. I wish I could say that this was where 2017 ends, with a nice open meta with a clear best deck, but in a way that was still beatable. But unfortunately, there was one more release right at the tail end of the year. The December weekly Shonen Jump promo would become legal for use on December 1st, being Link Kuriboh, a Link 1 requiring a level 1 that can tribute itself to make an opponent's attacking monster drop to 0 attack, and can revive itself by tributing a level 1 monster. All of the issues that were solved on Quick Fix Link climbing immediately became present once more, as you could summon Quick Fix, search a spiral card.
Well, the cool thing was, as a European, we didn't have to worry about that for a while. This only came to us months later, at which point it was still very powerful, but at the time of release, we didn't have to worry about it.
Link it off for Link Kuriboh, pitch the search card to resummon Quick Fix, and do it all again. Able to do it up to 6 times between the actual summon of Link Kuriboh and the tribute to summon from Grave Effect, meaning that with this, Tier 0 Spiral was back on the menu, which sadly, we will need to save for next time, as with this release, 2017 Yu-Gi-Oh! Came to a close. With a year full of Tier 0 after Tier 0, a player base that had been heavily fractured, and a game teetering on the edge of yet another Tier 0 format, everyone still remaining held out hope that things would get better in 2018. However, it's always darkest before the dawn. And sadly, in this context, it could still get a good bit darker. Buckle up, this is gonna get really bumpy really fast.
All right. Well, that marks the end of 2017. That was a banger session. That was a long session. The link, once again, to this video is pinned in the chat. If you like this type of content, make sure to check out the Law Yugioh if you want to see any of the previous years that we've all watched. And you missed it, go check him out, go show him some love, leave a comment or subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that was a nice session. How long was that, dude? We probably watched for like 2.5 hours or something. Good times.